Hi, Margaret.
Hi, Sam.
Nice to see you.
Good to see you too.
Yeah. So we're just in practice mode right now. We're going live in about 2 minutes.
Sorry, did you want me on earlier?
Yeah, is that okay? I'm going to do my 20-minute talk, and then I might go straight and introduce you as the next speaker.
Fine. And stick to the 20 minutes?
Yeah, still 20 minutes. Yeah, that's great.
Okay.
Those guys and girls have been so lovely to talk. Your two US parents. One of them's actually over in the UK right now.
Is it James?
Yeah, I think James. Yeah.
Yeah.
But he was so keen to be involved, so it was lovely of him.
He's brilliant. He's so energetic.
Yeah. No, it's great. And we've got a parent talking about domestic surrogacy in the panel who also used you. A gay guy who did domestic journey.
Cameron?
Now what's his name? Sean Johns.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So he's doing the domestic side of things.
I think Sean had a bob each way. He might have used me for his first, and then he used Stuart for his second.
Right. Okay.
Interestingly enough, but yeah.
Right.
So what do you want me to talk more about the domestic?
Oh, look, I mean, I think more about overseas. I mean,
yeah, I thought
more people go offshore. Look,
I know they do.
I'd try and cover a bit of both, but I mean, my talk will be a bit overseas.
I'll cover it off both because and really what people need to know in New Zealand is that things are changing.
Yeah.
Well, there's Fiona. Yeah. Oh, hello, Fiona. Nice to see you.
That's great. Hello, Fiona. Nice to see you.
Hello there, Sam.
Hello.
Hi, Margaret.
Hi, Fiona. We really should be doing this over a glass of wine. You know that, don't you?
Absolutely. It'll calm my nerves. I
know. Now, look, I'm going to put you guys on. I'm going to shut your video down because we're about to go live, and I'll bring you back in later.
Okay.
When we go.
What are our numbers like?
And put yourself on mute or something.
Yeah. Okay, I'm muting.
Okay.
Numbers, Sam?
Oh, 27 couples, I think.
Okay.
28 couples. Hello, everybody. Welcome. I can see a lot of people are just logging on now. So I'll just start to do a few introductions of what's in store for us all this afternoon. My name's Sam Everingham. I'm going to be your host for this New Zealand webinar. We're going to hear from Margaret Casey, and I'll introduce her a bit later about some New Zealand legal issues for surrogacy and egg donation. We're going to also hear from Reimbursement about some of the medical issues you've got to think about. We'll hear from a young adult via surrogacy. We'll hear from parents who view surrogacy in the USA and in Canada and in New Zealand as well. You'll hear from Verona Principles, from Fiona, who works as the international coordinator there. You'll hear about surrogacy in Canada and in Georgia, as well as hearing from surrogates themselves. So there's going to be a lot to take in. We will record the sessions so you can look at them later on, because I know it's a lot to sort of go through in 3.5 hours. So be aware that'll be available to you too if you need to go away and get a cup of tea and come back. Let me start by, I'm going to run through a bit of an overview this afternoon of egg donor and surrogacy considerations for those looking at overseas options. A bit later, we'll be looking at domestic as well. But we do know that a lot of New Zealanders do go offshore for either eggs or a surrogate or both. So I'm going to take you through what the current environment is looking like in that space right now, given we've had so many changes with COVID and so forth. Look, there will be time for you to ask questions on the Q&A tab, and we'll answer those probably, if there's not time during the session, then afterwards by typing in responses. So have a look at those answers too. Feel free to ask presenters any questions you have along the way. This is a great chance for you to really get the most out of this by asking the presenters some of those tough questions you've been dying to know about. And that goes for the panelists too. We'll have certainly some Q&A with the panelists a bit later. All right, so I'm just going to share a screen with you now. Let me just get this going. Okay. So just a second here. Right. So look, I'm going to talk briefly about the mindset you need to engage in what we call in the sector third-party reproduction. It means you have to, third-party means you're using someone else for the eggs or for the surrogacy part. I'm going to talk about doing your own research and the traps there, eligibility, making embryos, surrogate issues, and a bit about consumer protection and differences by country. So mindset-wise, this is an area where you need to be able to trust in other people. There are a number of professionals you'll be working with during the process, and they are people who've done this kind of work a lot, and they know what they're doing. So you need to be able to be guided by them, whether it's, you know, growing families, your lawyers, your agency. You need to be flexible because things won't work out the way you think they will. You may need to change donors, you may need a different surrogate, you may need to do something in another country you hadn't thought of doing before. You can't be a Scrooge with money. And this particularly goes for those of you who are engaging with a surrogate, wherever that is, even if it's an altruistic arrangement, as they are in Canada and Australia and New Zealand. There are still significant expenses that you must account for and put aside money for your surrogate. The last thing we want is for your surrogate or your donor to be left out of pocket in these areas. There are also unexpected things that can happen with failed transfers, so you need to get a good idea of what this may cost before you engage. And when it comes to surrogates, also trust is a key thing there, because obviously this woman is looking after your baby for 9 months and preparing for that often many, many months before that. You need to trust her. You can't micromanage the whole process. But again, it does require you to really let go in some ways. Let me move on to doing your own research. A lot of people have come to our events after spending a lot of time on online forums. And we do get lots of feedback that those forums can be very confusing and off-putting. I know, because we started those forums ourselves 10 years ago, and then we outsourced them to other people because it was getting a bit much. You will find conflicting information on forums. You will find judgmental attitudes. You'll find people who are saying, oh, if you're using a donor who's 40, you're wasting your time. Some people are harsh. You will also find that there are people from all over the world in these forums. If you're in a group for surrogacy in the USA or surrogacy in Georgia, there will be people from different countries there. The confusing thing about that is there are different rules for different nationalities. So a way that one family is doing this may be totally different to how you need to do it. You can't cut and paste someone else's journey to your own. Even if they are in the same country as you, it's not a cut and paste job. This is just too complex. You're not buying a washing machine or a car. You're preparing a large project which involves lots of players. You will find ads online for surrogacy in countries like India still, although surrogacy in India for foreigners stopped many years ago now, about eight years ago. It's very hard to know from the online ads that programs aren't offered anymore, and you can waste a lot of time and get very frustrated by going down the garden path with blank holes. You will find horror stories online. The media loves to publish horror stories in this area, and so you'll see them. You know, there's one online from 2015 about a gay couple who went to Thailand, and unfortunately the agency they engaged with had not told the surrogate she was caring for a gay couple. She took issue with that, and when the child was born and she found that out, she didn't want to relinquish the child, caused major issues. So it makes it very clear. A lesson from that isolated case was that you must make sure your surrogate is across who you are and you've met her up front, and there are no secrets. You will find lots of out-of-date experiences online forums. Lots of people have done surrogacy in the past and are very happy to share their experiences, but they are often out of date in countries which no longer operate, for example, or with agencies that were once good and have now gone downhill. So be careful of that. You will also find dodgy agents online as well, trying to sell you into programs. Instead, make sure you also talk to parents who use particular providers, whether it's a lawyer or an agency. Understand the contract terms and conditions before you sign things, and talk to experts who have insights into a range of providers like Growing Families or your lawyer or whatever. Eligibility. For those of you who are new to this area, I'm talking here about surrogacy now rather than donors. You need to understand that there are only a few countries that have regulated programs for surrogacy, which would put both parents on the birth certificate, where you're foreigners. So they are the USA, Canada, Greece, Ukraine, and Georgia, and possibly Russia if you're brave. So the last three of those, Greece, Ukraine, and Georgia, only take certain subsections of the population. They won't take single males or gay couples, for instance, and they won't issue a local passport. So you can't bring your child home until you have a New Zealand travel document. And you'll hear more about that a bit later today. There are what we call unregulated countries, which will put one male parent on the birth certificate with the surrogate, and Argentina and Mexico are those. Sorry, that's Colombia and Mexico in that category. Argentina will actually put two dads on the birth certificate. Also bear in mind that although some countries that are newer for surrogacy, like Colombia and Argentina, will issue a local passport, that doesn't necessarily mean you can travel back to New Zealand with that passport. The New Zealand government would have to issue a visa to allow the child to come, and that's no easy feat. So more often you will need to wait until you've got a New Zealand document. Where do you make embryos? Now, this has become particularly a popular question during COVID because people are less willing to travel to do that. It is important to engage with a good clinic, and you'll hear from Reprimed later about what they do. You can ship embryos or sperm or both overseas if you don't have a local surrogate. So that is possible, and the clinics and Growing Families can cooperate with you on that. Some clinics are sensitive about mentioning international surrogacy. They don't want you to mention that. So you've got to be careful what you say to them. And some clinics, will depend on their policy, might not make embryos unless you've got a surrogate ready to go. So it's often important to get that clear up front. I'm going to talk a bit about vaccination because it's a key issue these days with COVID. As many of you will be aware, if you're pregnant and you have COVID, you're at much greater risk of more severe illness than if you're not pregnant. So you're more likely to be admitted to hospital, to go to intensive care, to need invasive ventilation, and mortality and morbidity means get sick or die. People also ask me, will my baby be affected if my surrogate or if I'm using a donor, has COVID during pregnancy? It does increase the risk of complications, a slightly higher risk of being born preterm, and increased risk of needing admission to intensive care during delivery. And there is an increased risk of stillbirth. So really, we want to make sure that pregnant women, whether it's yourself or your surrogate, are vaccinated prior, because it does guard against the risk of these things happening. Some people also ask us, are these vaccines safe in pregnancy? And the research has already shown that yes, these mRNA vaccines like the Pfizer one are safe. And so pregnant women are a priority group for that vaccination and should be routinely offered it. The problem we have is a lot of surrogates do not want to be vaccinated. And that's not just in New Zealand, but it's across the world. The attitudes tend to be things like they don't trust the government, they're poorly educated, or in places like the USA and New Zealand, it might be, you know, my body, my choice, I don't want to put something foreign in there, or not knowing about the unknown side effects. Unfortunately, in places like the USA, many specialists won't work with unvaccinated surrogates. In countries like Ukraine and the US, many surrogates just don't want to be vaxxed. Georgia, slightly better, you'll hear about that a bit later today. The surrogate population is more educated and the clinics are being very strict on that. But it is an issue. And what's happened as a result of that is there are longer match times for surrogates around the globe because of this issue of vaccination, which you need to bear in mind. Look, some intending parents are happy to work with unvaccinated surrogates, but I want you to be aware of the risks there. A little bit on consumer protection, because if you are engaging offshore, you know, you're putting your money with a foreign company, it's very hard to get that money back if you have issues. We have found with 10 years experience that it's better to probably avoid paying agencies a lot of money up front until your surrogate match is confirmed, particularly in the US and Canadian context. Understand that those countries that have guarantee programs are only available when you're using donor eggs, aren't available in places like Canada or New Zealand. Overseas contracts aren't recognisable or enforceable in New Zealand. It's important that you do get legal advice as a New Zealand citizen about these issues. And Margaret will talk about that a bit later. In terms of peer support, professional support, some agencies run their own Facebook groups, and there are also specific Facebook groups for those engaging in specific countries for surrogacy, with the provisos I talked about before. And we also offer customized support for those who don't want to share their whole journey online or a bit more private. A quick bit from me on differences by country. So this table really summarizes sort of the 5 countries where we see most intending parents engaging because they have regulated systems in place. Cost, you'll find places like the USA are much higher, but they've been doing this for 30, 35 years. They have very good screening of surrogates in place and support of surrogates. USA, Canada and Greece, you'll get a court order clearing yourself the parent under their law. In Georgia and Ukraine, you won't. So the exit processes will differ. You can travel home from the USA or Canada with the child on a US or Canadian passport often. Also, you must be aware that in countries that are English speaking, like New Zealand, like US and Canada, the surrogate match is a personal thing that you will agree between yourself and your surrogate. In New Zealand particularly, you'll have to get very close to your surrogate before you decide to work together. In the USA and Canada, your surrogate needs to want to work with you as well, and there'll be a Zoom call to establish that over a number of hours to meet her and her family. In non-English speaking countries, it's more your surrogate is assigned to you by your medical doctor over there after being medically screened, and there's much less of a relationship because of the language and cultural barriers. The IVF success rates down the bottom of that chart, you'll find are quite a bit higher in some countries because, like the USA, because they will standardly do something called PGD testing of embryos, which means they will check the embryos that are made to count the number of chromosomes in them to make sure they put aside the ones that seem abnormal. And that gives you the best chances with the embryos that are left. Yeah, that's an issue to think about there. The success rates also, remember, they will depend on what sort of a donor you're using or whether you're using your own eggs. Success is highly dependent on the age of the woman providing the eggs, whether that's you or your donor. And we do find the success rates decrease dramatically after the age of 35, and even from the age of 30 to 35, there is a decrease in success. So younger donors are better in that sense. And because of the way New Zealand and Australia works, and that we can't compensate our donors beyond expenses, most women who do become donors in Australia and New Zealand are women who've had their own kids already and want to help other couples. And those women tend to be aged to the 30 years or more. So the quality of eggs is lesser. Whereas countries like the USA and say Greece, who can compensate their donors, tend to attract younger women who are university students who want to earn a bit of extra pocket money. Considerations about where you engage. Think about affordability for yourself, the stability of that country. Obviously, Ukraine comes to mind right now. Peace of mind, distance, track record, and the level of engagement you are comfortable with your surrogate. We don't want you engaging in a country like New Zealand, for example, if you're not prepared to fully support your surrogate. Because surrogates aren't paid in these environments, instead they want a relationship with you, an ongoing and meaningful relationship with you. And if that's not something you're comfortable with, then it's probably better not to go ahead there. Capacity is an issue in some countries. Colombia is pretty much at capacity, and we don't recommend people go there at the moment. Canada is going well. There is a longer wait time for surrogates, and you probably better chance of matching, to be honest, if you're a gay couple or gay single there. But Cindy and Leigh will talk about that a bit later. The USA can be longer wait times too. If you want to surrogate carry twins, that's really harder, because it's much harder on the surrogate. So it's less popular for surrogates to want to do that. So you will find it longer match times to find surrogates who will carry twins. And in the US, it can be prohibitively expensive in terms of the insurance, because insurance premiums for a surrogate carrying twins are fairly enormous. Last thing from me, we do offer customized advice and step-by-step plans. If you come away thinking this is all too much still, I still can't work out where I'm going. So bear that in mind. What it tends to do is just guide you through introductions to providers, making this a step-by-step process that's logical and doesn't miss out on anything, helps you with logistics such as shipping, cost containment, answering all your questions along the way, and giving you those access to the experts when you need them. So that's all from me right now. We're going to actually change the order of the program slightly and have Margaret Casey on next, and then we'll look at Canada after that. So Margaret, I might just get you to share your video while I'm introducing you. So Margaret was admitted in 1983. She's been a barrister since 1993. She's got an undergrad degree from Auckland University and a master's from King's College in London. She's highly qualified in this area. She's the go-to legal expert in New Zealand in the surrogacy area. She was the inaugural chair of the family law section, member of the executive for a number of years in New Zealand. She specialised particularly in the Hague Convention on International Surrogacy. She's acted for clients who've undertaken surrogacy in the USA, in India, Thailand, Australia, and the UK. And many of the cases have been reported in New Zealand. So we're really lucky to have her talking to us today about some of the legal considerations you should be thinking about when it comes to surrogacy. Let's see if we can find Margaret's video here.
I've unmuted, and
right.
I think you need to start me.
Okay.
Okay, start my video.
Terrific. Wonderful. Nice to see
Hello,
you.
everyone. I have 20 minutes, which is a bit like speed dating with you around some of the main things that you will need to think about if you're thinking about surrogacy as a way of creating your family. I agree with many of the things that Sam has said. And what I just wanted to do was to preface my discussion this afternoon with you by saying, do understand that this is an ever-changing field. So there's a major review going on in relation to the legal process for surrogacy in New Zealand, and that has been led by a government body called the Law Commission, and they are looking at the ways we can reform the law on surrogacy, and I believe that within around a year we should see big changes. So everything I tell you today probably will have changed. That's the first thing. The second thing is that COVID has been a game changer in terms of processes and legal processes. And while initially it caused problems, it's encouraged us to look at a different way of doing things that now make international surrogacy processes much more streamlined and less stressful. And I'll talk about that. But the first thing that I just wanted to say is I was to be talking about domestic and international, and I'll talk very briefly about domestic, but focus mainly on international. But what's important for you to be aware of, and you will know this, I'm sure, that the big issue with the legal process is being recognised as your child's legal parents once the child is born. And it doesn't matter whether you have a baby overseas through surrogacy or in New Zealand, the same rules apply to determine who are the first legal parents, and that's under our current rules. So it won't matter what's on a birth certificate in Georgia or Ukraine. New Zealand rules treat the woman who gives birth, and if she has a partner, as the first legal parents, and the mechanism by which we transfer parentage at the moment is using the old adoption rules. All right, so that's important to know that within this next 12 to 18 months, if you become parents, in order to be recognised and your child to be your own child on a New Zealand birth certificate with New Zealand citizenship, you will need to transfer parentage using the adoption process. And that adoption process has become streamlined also. It's not the same adoption process if you were adopting a process in a tradition, adopting a child in a traditional way, but it still does have some of the it still does have some of that sort of overview of an adoption process, which people find really difficult to deal with when they're considering a process of having recognition for a child they already see as their own. So the first thing to understand is you go through an adoption process. So do you need a lawyer for that? Well, I mean, I'm a lawyer, so I obviously, I come from a perspective of saying, yes, you need me. Of course you need me. You need someone like me. One of the reasons I do say that is, as Sam said, it's not straightforward. And it's tempting when you've spent so much money as you do often on your fertility treatment to think that the paperwork shouldn't cost as much as it does, or that the process is something that you will be able to deal with. Ultimately, you will get there. But when I talk to clients, I talk to them about where do they want to focus their energies. And mostly for people I work with whose focus and energy for a long, long time is on becoming parents, when that finally happens, they do need someone alongside of them to say, give that to me, give that to me. I can do that. I can take that off you. I can tell you what to do next. You focus on what you want to do, which is being parents to this much weighted child. And the second thing is your legal process works faster if you've got someone else in the driving seat who's got legal experience. I genuinely believe that. Things change. You've got to be up with it. You've got to get your documents right, and you don't want your surrogacy journey to be like a snakes and ladders board where you think you're getting ahead and then something happens and you go back to the beginning. Get someone else to guide you through that, and someone who genuinely has experience, not someone who says that, yes, I know, I've done one of these, and so therefore I know what to do. That, as Sam has said, every family is different. And even, and Fiona will agree with this, that the families that we work with, there's always an individual element that means I have to ring her or she rings me and we go, well, how are we going to deal with this? Or, oh, yes, we did that on that one, but maybe this time we'll move it around this way. So get someone who knows what they are doing. But what you need to know is that you'll need to do an adoption. And if you go overseas, the question is, in this COVID time, when that adoption process happens. What's happened with COVID is, for a whole variety of practical reasons, historically, families who undertook an overseas surrogacy would come back to New Zealand with a visa that was specially issued for them, and there had been almost a pre-approval process in advance of the birth, where you worked with someone like Fiona, a social worker, the lawyer, to kind of give you a green light in terms of an expedited visa process that would be issued just before the birth or shortly after the birth, or the approval would come before the birth, but the actual visa after the birth. What we found with COVID is that that system ground to a halt, not because of anything that was happening in New Zealand, but passports in the country of birth were just not being issued. And so the agencies who are all involved in helping to bring a family home changed, or to use the new word of COVID times, pivoted. And so what happens now for these babies is that there's still an adoption, but the adoption process starts while the families are offshore. So James, who will be speaking to you later, he will talk to you about the process he went through, and he came back to New Zealand with his babies and had an adoption hearing in New Zealand not long after he was back here, and he travelled on the visa system. If he were to undertake his surrogacy now, he would be doing what I did for a family just recently, is that the adoption process happens via AVL. The judge is in her court. I'm here in my office. They are wherever they are in the world. And the adoption process, supported by the social worker who has met the family during the pregnancy and then has a sort of proof of life home visit while the family are in the other jurisdiction, finalises her report for the court. Why is this better? Well, I say it's better because it means that by the time the family comes back to New Zealand, the legal work is completed. I say it's better because it's there's so much less stress that for the family who are sitting with a newborn in another jurisdiction. And the key to it is that the adoption order generates a New Zealand passport, and passports have been issued within about 24 to 48 hours of the birth and sent by courier to where the parents are in the other jurisdiction. So the child comes in as a New Zealand citizen, and given the border issues that we've had in COVID, that has ended up being a way of the family being able to get into MIQ and getting flights back to New Zealand. Will that survive the end of the pandemic, that kind of process? If I was ruling the world, it would. I don't rule the world, but we've learned from it a whole lot of techniques for making this process much more family friendly. So COVID has changed things, and It's also changed, I suppose, the way people have been viewing their plans. What I was going to finish with, because Sam, how am I going for my time? I've got another 10.
You've got another 7 minutes.
Okay. Can I talk to you about, based on my experience working with couples and single parents, what helps and what doesn't when you're making a plan? I think what helps is that you try and mirror as much as you can what would happen if you were doing a surrogacy in New Zealand. And when you do a surrogacy in New Zealand, you do have a relationship with your surrogate. When you do a surrogacy in New Zealand and you use a donor, that donor is identified. When you do a surrogacy in New Zealand, you have some counselling where you work through the kind of things that you would document in an agreement that is a compulsory part of being overseas. The important part from where I sit and from a child's rights perspective is that when these children grow up, if you have maintained a relationship with a surrogate and are able to answer the questions a child has about that surrogate, that's really good for the child. When you can provide a child information about the egg donor, that's really good for the child. And you are protected legally because our New Zealand rules, which remember apply even if you have an egg donor from another country, those rules say an egg donor or a sperm donor is never a parent. So you're only keeping that door open from an identity and information perspective, not keeping it open so that there's ever a challenge to your status as the legal parents of this child. So I think it helps to match the process that we have in New Zealand. What doesn't matter is if you don't need to be married, you don't need to be in a committed relationship. You don't need to be married. You can do this as a single parent. You don't need to be heterosexual. You don't need to. It helps if one of you is a New Zealand citizen. Sorry, the font is really small, and even though I've got my glasses on. It doesn't matter. What doesn't matter is whether your surrogate is married, single or divorced. It's something you're often asked by the overseas agency. And it doesn't really matter who's actually named on the foreign birth certificate. So one of the things that I find, particularly in the US cases, is you get asked a whole lot of things. What do you need your overseas birth certificate to look like? Well, it doesn't actually matter who's on that US birth certificate, whether it's you, your partner, you and your surrogate, or you as a single parent, because I've just finished telling you that those foreign birth certificates are not recognised in New Zealand. But I do think it actually helps just in the short term, if you're in a foreign country, to actually be on the birth certificate. If there's two of you who are going to be parenting this child, then be on that birth certificate, because it covers you while you're over there, and it does give you at least some tangible paperwork until we get to the point where we can generate a New Zealand document that confirms your status.
Can I ask a quick question? Does New Zealand issue a New Zealand birth certificate for those who go through the process?
After the adoption?
Right.
Yeah, the effect of an adoption order is that the child is re-registered in the birth certificate, in birth deaths and marriages in New Zealand. So it's different from like an overseas recognition process where you might say have an adoption from another country, and then you ask for the court to recognise that. The New Zealand birth certificate is a brand new document, and what the birth certificate, what the effect of an adoption order is that it treats the child as if they were born in New Zealand. So it's not citizenship by descent, it's citizenship by birth.
Before that's issued and before the process is done, are there limitations to getting eligibility for hospital services or other things?
No.
Maybe?
In the old visa system, when you came into New Zealand, that visa covered that.
Right.
So you were covered in that period, for that period until you actually got your New Zealand birth certificate. While we're doing things offshore, and some of this emergency, what we called an emergency protocol, and you have to get permission from the court to use it. When you're using that emergency protocol, you of course are not back in New Zealand until you come back with the child who is in the post-adoption phase and therefore a New Zealand citizen. Another question people often ask me is like how long that process takes. James, I think, had the world record in terms of families I worked with his second child, and he'll probably tell us exactly what that was. I think it was under 4 weeks, James, wasn't it?
I think it was way under 4 weeks. I think, didn't we get the last one in 11 days or something?
It can't have been because you had to have the adoption consent.
Oh no, I think we were 4 to 6 weeks to get them back in the country.
Yeah,
but we got the paperwork through something really quickly. Yeah, I
was calling James's son Rocket Baby because it was so fast. And it was a combination of things, but it was also because he was extremely organised and proactive and action man. But the process at the moment for any of you thinking that when you're leaving the country is that you do have to give yourself plenty of time, and don't put yourself under pressure thinking that you can magically be back in New Zealand 4 weeks after the birth. You will go early because you want to be there for the birth, and you will need to allow 6 weeks as a minimum before you get back into the country. I think that takes my time up, and if anyone's got any questions.
That's really useful, Margaret. Just one last question from me that's come in here. At what stage should New Zealanders start engaging with a lawyer in the process?
I get lots of inquiries from people who are just doing their reconnaissance mission, because it's really helpful because I can say to them exactly what you've just been saying. If the overseas fertility clinic or doctor says are not focusing on the rules in your country of nationality, then you need to double check what's actually going on. So I say it's a tandem process. It's only a very first initial one, but when you're doing your surrogacy agreements, it's really important that when you're feeding stuff into the agency there's a couple of things that it's quite useful to put into those agreements so that the surrogate knows that there's a separate process and they're not just thinking about what's happening in Georgia and thinking job done, that we will need something from them after the birth. So the heavy engagement with a lawyer comes from the point of pregnancy, but there should be some scoping work all done at the same time as you're engaging with the overseas agency. And very often, you'll talk to someone, you'll get in touch with someone like Cindy, and she will say, I'll go and talk to this person, like Margaret in New Zealand, who's worked with us before. And we all start to talk together because it just makes it a way easier process if everyone knows everyone else in the picture. And there's quite a small circle of us who are involved in this.
That's right.
And that actually helps because we have pre-existing relationships, and this is such a new field, an evolving field. It's really good to be sharing and working with people who know each other.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Margaret. Terrific. Really, really nice. On that point, we're gonna switch over to the Canadian model, and we're going to hear from one of Margaret's colleagues in Canada, Cindy Wasser, who is not only one of Canada's sort of best surrogacy lawyers, but she's also a mum via surrogacy. So she's doubly qualified to help parents in this area. So we're really excited to have her. I think, Cindy, your first child was born in 2008, wasn't that right, I think?
Yes.
We've done a
She's
surrogacy.
13 and had her hair colored and highlighted today and became 18 in a 2-hour period, and I'm like dying right now.
So like many lawyers in the specialised sector, Cindy helps with agreements with parents, with surrogates and with donors. We're also going to hear from Leah Swanberg, who runs Canada's largest surrogacy agency, Canadian Fertility Consulting. So Leah is also brilliantly qualified because she's also been a surrogate herself. So she's got 5 kids of her own, been a surrogate twice, and 6 times she's been an egg donor. So it was back in 2007 she began Canadian Fertility Consulting and their sister company Egg Helpers, which does the egg part. And her real aim is to really support surrogates and donors as well as intending parents. Leia's really in this, to help surrogates, and she's had an extraordinary record of recruiting surrogates throughout Canada to help with these journeys for so many people who can't find a surrogate in their own countries. So Leia, thanks for coming in. That's great. I don't know who wants to start first, but these guys are going to talk to us about both the legal considerations and how the surrogacy system works in Canada. It's different in New Zealand, because there are agencies like Leia's who can help you. But these guys can talk a bit more about it.
Thanks, Sam. I'm happy to go first, Cindy, if you like.
Sure.
Perfect. So it's great to be speaking with all of you in New Zealand, a place I've never been, but would love to visit. I understand our cultures are very similar and values are virtually the same. And so as I talk about surrogacy in Canada to people anywhere outside of Canada, it really is important to understand that my view around surrogacy differs than many other sort of industry professionals who want to talk about how great the place they represent is. And I really want to share that regardless of where you go to build your family, the one thing that I know for sure is great is the motivation of the women that are surrogates and egg donors. And so as you look at destinations, whether it's Canada, Ukraine, Georgia, Greece, any of these places, knowing that you take yourself with you and you're able to build this journey in a way that really fits your values, and they say you take yourself with you, and you really do. And so as you're looking at surrogacy in Canada, I want to assure you that the women in Canada are cared for, supported, protected by an amazing legal structure that Cindy will talk about. And we know that when people are protected and cared for and supported, they're able to make good decisions and the outcomes are so much better. And I say that in terms of egg donors in our program who are registered in our program, Sacred Donation, which is an online platform that allows donors to drop into meditations and yoga practices. And we have a counselor that is there to care for them throughout the entire donor journey and up to and including 6 months post-retrieval, to ensure that should she have anything that she needs to unpack during her egg donor process, whether it's the excitement, the anticipation, we always want to share that, or if it's, feeling unwell from medication, or, needing to navigate or understand how to best navigate a known donor relationship, which 80% of our donors are part of. And so for us, having these types of supports in place really, I believe, make our agency, but make Canada unique in that the support for the donors and the surrogates is so important. But with that means that we support these women, whether it is in moving forward, in deciding whether it's a known or anonymous donation, navigating the ins and outs of their surrogacy journey. But also in some cases, you know, we recognize that it isn't the right time for a surrogate or a donor. And so, you know, we do have clients from time to time, you know, have a surrogate or donor walk away, and supporting women for us means supporting them as they enter our program, you know, or unfortunately leave. So that's a bit about the background. As far as an agency, we operate similarly to the US model. We help people find surrogates and donors who meet their particular criteria. We ensure that you're paired with a clinic who can receive your embryos from all over the world. Canadian clinics are not bound by the FDA requirements. And so we can accept embryos from anywhere. And so this week, in fact, we've had, I think, 5 or 6 sets of intended parents ship their embryos from the Ukraine and sort of transfer programs. And we organize that far ahead of finding them a surrogate or working through any other pieces. We really are a clearinghouse of information and access to service. So many clients reach out to us and we connect them to the clinic, the lawyer, lawyers within their jurisdiction, which is really the first place that we want to send people, is back to a lawyer in their community that can tell them, yes, Canada is safe to proceed, or, you know, yes, it is. However, we need the legal agreement to look like this. And so we coordinate all of that as we're getting to know you as intended parents, as we're developing a relationship. And the relationship is so important because we will be working together for, you know, likely 6 months until you're matched, and then throughout your pregnancy and up to 6 months postpartum, as the counselor that's on staff with us for our egg donors is also on staff with us for our surrogates and our intended parents. And so we want to hang on to you until you are well on your way home or home, and settled into new parent life. So as I said, our agency operates very similarly to those in the US. However, we do have an altruistic model. So our donors and surrogates are reimbursed, not compensated. And depending on if there's anyone on here, you know, sort of from outside New Zealand, depending on where you're from, the legal agreement is drafted to ensure, you know, when you get home that there are no issues. And on that note, I'll turn it over to Cindy to talk a little bit about the legal process.
Thank you, Leah. So as both Margaret and Leah mentioned, coordinating the process together is critical. And having a team that stands by you, has your back and your front throughout the whole journey, will make it so much easier for you to concentrate on what you need to do, which is being a parent. So I've worked with Margaret on numerous files, and just like Leah also said, it's very important for me to ensure that a foreigner coming to Canada to make a baby has received legal advice back home. And so if that hasn't happened yet, one of the first things I say to my New Zealand clients is, you've got to talk to Margaret. And I will stay in touch with Margaret periodically to say anything new. And so I am hoping that your Law Reform Commission will call me to talk, because I was the only Canadian lawyer that the Law Reform Commission and the UK contacted when they did their thorough review. And they recommended a model based on the Canadian model, and in fact, based on the model of Ontario, where I live, which is a legal model that I helped create. Because, as you heard, I became a parent through surrogacy in 2008. And before I became a fertility lawyer at that time, I was a criminal defense lawyer. So I was used to fighting for justice. And the word was very important to me. Semantics was everything. And so when I went through this process and I read the Canadian law, I was quite frankly, to be honest, appalled. And appalled by the whole process. It was almost secretive, it was quiet, no one talked. the law was something I didn't understand. When I hired a lawyer to go to court, she said she was going to ask the judge to make me the mother of my child, and my husband was the father. And I said, wait a minute, I am the mother. Why are we begging some family court judge, I don't know, to declare that of me? I've been this baby's mother for years in the planning and the hope and the grief. I don't deserve to be treated differently than another mother. In fact, I deserve a medal for persevering. And then I thought about same-sex couples, and I thought, hell yeah, they deserve medals too for fighting for this right. And so why do we have this process? And so I became a fertility lawyer after the birth of my daughter, Etta. And the first thing I started doing was lobbying for change. And, you know, pounding on the doors of government leaders saying, make me a parent, make the laws better for me, really doesn't work. But when you hold up the picture of the baby and you say, do it for the baby, oh, well, then they start crying and they listen and things change. So it's all about what is the best interest of the children. And that is the same principle in New Zealand that we have in Canada. And so as Margaret says, it doesn't matter whose name goes on your birth certificate. In Canada, it will depend on the province of birth. But even in a province like Quebec, where only the father may go on the birth certificate, or the surrogate and the father, that will be okay for you in New Zealand. And we have lots of great surrogates in Quebec. But if something were to happen to that non-named parent, while before you have any rights in New Zealand, our courts would more than likely do something extraordinary and say, the best interest of this baby is to have that non-named parent named, because we have an overriding principle of all our legal systems related to children where the court will interfere and do something that's not in the law in the best interest of that child. So we don't worry about that. We can get the birth declaration if both parents died, God forbid, and it's never happened, and I don't want to go down that route, but I will for one moment. We'll make you parents even if you're not here. So we will have you protected because that's just how it is here in Canada. So the other thing that I want to talk about, which Leah also spoke about, is having that wonderful relationship, which Margaret said is so important for you, and I'm sure Fiona will talk about it. It is critical because, again, it's not about the legal process, it's about your child. And I was blessed to have a donor who became known and is very important to my children. They do ask questions about their personality, but it's not a legal issue because in Canada, as Margaret alluded to, the laws say that the donor is not a parent by virtue only of being a donor. And of course, one of you is going to be a donor, whether it's the egg or the sperm partner, you are intended to be a parent. So you don't have to worry about having that relationship. And the surrogate's rights, if any, will be completely terminated by a court order or by the administrative process. So I can give Margaret anything she asks for of me, within reason of your birth certificate, that is. She's not a terribly demanding person, but she's really great at what she does. And all of my clients have said that she is fantastic to work with, which makes me feel good because if I'm referring, I want to make sure you've got a good person doing it. So in some of our provinces, like Ontario, you don't even have to go to court. And if Margaret says, I don't care how you get a birth certificate from Canada, because we don't care about it anyway legally, then you might as well go the less expensive route of the administrative one. So we have that here in Ontario, again, because I pushed for the rights of intended parents to spend less money and need less legal processes getting in the way. And our government listened. We have that process in British Columbia. It's recently done in Saskatchewan, although the paperwork hasn't come out because of COVID. Prince Edward Island has just enacted it. Again, it hasn't been done yet. No paperwork because of COVID, but that's all lifting up. And we're looking at more and more provinces developing. There is a legislative bill in Quebec right now promoting it. They will have an election, it will die, so it'll come back and it'll happen over the next few years. More and more provinces will do this, taking it away from the courts, which is an expensive process, and streamlining it. And if you don't need a court order, then don't spend the money on one. The other things I wanted to talk about was healthcare. We have universal healthcare here, as you do, but you are not a Canadian resident or taxpayer. You don't live in any province of our country. And although your baby will be an automatic Canadian citizen upon birth, entitled to a Canadian passport, that citizenship by itself does not entitle your child to healthcare. You must reside here, and for almost half a year. So if I took off for a year, if only I could, for sabbatical and travel, I would lose my healthcare after 6 months. So people who do that come back for a week or two, keep their feet on Canadian soil and keep their healthcare. So you will not have that for your baby. You must ensure that you have something. And if your local healthcare will not cover that for a baby born in Canada, we will be introducing you to a broker through Art Risk, which is an American company that has special policies for surrogate babies born in Canada as well. And you will purchase that newborn policy. Most of them carry through for at least half a year, if not longer, for the newborn back home. So if your process changes and there is a gap in citizenship in New Zealand and your baby's healthcare is questionable, even for 5 minutes, you're still covered until your adoption process is finalized. Do I love this adoption process happening here? Yes, I love that you can do it before you go home. And I hope that it will continue, because I think a lot of these streamlined processes that developed over COVID have become the norm, and it's very difficult for authorities around the world to say, well, that didn't work, because it worked better everywhere. So I'm hoping they keep it as well. I'm around for questions. We only have, I think, 5 minutes left. So Leah, maybe you can come back, and Sam, do we have any questions?
Yeah, look, there's one come in. Who does the Canadian surrogate need her own legal representation?
Yes, we really, really, really value the importance of independent legal counsel. Now, she can legally waive it in some places, but it may affect the birth registration. So in Ontario and BC, where we have the administrative process, if she didn't have her own lawyer for each surrogacy, you will have to go to court and spend a lot more money to get that court order. But in a province like Alberta, they'll be fine if she waives it, but we really don't like that. We'd like her to be well protected and honored that way and cared for. And maybe the second journey, and even if it's with the same parent, she might say, we can just review it for 10 minutes at the end because I know it. But I think, Leah, you wanted to say that you would not like it at all, right?
You know, we have worked really hard with the lawyers in Canada that primarily represent surrogates, and have negotiated with them to ensure that they will work with the surrogate throughout the entire pregnancy. So should she have questions, about her legal obligations, should she go through a separation or a divorce, or should her employment change and her bed rest amount? And for us, it's really important, because in protecting her, you're protecting the baby, and you're protecting the intended parents. And again, Sam, it goes back to that piece I said, we take ourselves with us. So in jurisdictions where surrogates aren't generally represented by a lawyer, I guide many intended parents who travel abroad for surrogacy, and I tell them, tell that agency that you'd love your surrogate to have a lawyer, to be certain that she understands what she's doing, because the chances of her changing her mind or not knowing what she's up to, is far diminished with great legal advice from the very beginning.
Okay, and you can help recommend a lawyer for the surrogates, can you?
Absolutely. So we generally, speak to the surrogate about what she's looking for in a lawyer, and what sort of core values she has. We really work from a trauma-informed lens. And so if she's had if she says, like, look, my divorce lawyer was this person and I don't want to work with that person, or we want to make sure she's very comfortable, and that her lawyer and the intended parent's lawyer will be able to work very closely to ensure that everyone is supported through the process.
Yeah, okay, that's great. Do you see these? Some people tell me, or ask me, is the contract binding in Canada? Do the surrogates change their minds. I mean, as you and I know, the surrogate's more worried about the intending parents not coming.
Right. But I mean, I will say this, and Cindy may disagree, but the good news in Canada is the surrogate's never changed her mind. But the bad news in Canada is the surrogate's never changed her mind. We know that, when people understand what they're going into and they have support, they're making good decisions. But, Cindy and the other lawyers we've worked with have really done a great job crafting this agreement to state from the very beginning that these intended parents are intending to be parents and the surrogate and donor aren't. But Cindy, you may have a different take on that.
And our law is very clear. So when COVID happened, we had to get federal legislation changed to have foreign parents allowed into the country. And so we had to call them parents. But we have abortion legislation here, which allows a woman to have an abortion up to a medically advisable place, because we don't think of the fetus as a baby. It's not a living person. So until it's born. So we couldn't call them parents because there was no baby at the time. And if we waited for birth, they wouldn't be here. So our federal legislation was enacted right after COVID within 9 days that said, you are a parent via surrogacy before the birth. You can come here. And then they had to change the rest of the legislation federally to say it's not even biological. There's an intention to parent. So if something did blow up and someone here in New Zealand got the first back case in Canada where surrogate changed her mind, our law would be clear. She's not the parent. She never intended to be a parent. Yeah. They did.
Yeah, okay.
I'm not worried about it.
Yeah. Well, guys, thank you so much. That's terrific. Other questions that come in during the day, I'll flip them your way.
Perfect.
But that's just wonderful to have you both on, because you've been doing this for so long. It's just great to have people who've got the experience you guys have got from doing it all.
Thank you. We'll see
Thank
you again.
You so much. And
that's great.
It was wonderful seeing Margaret too. Thanks, Sam.
Right.
Thanks.
So we're now going to come back to the New Zealand context, and I'm going to introduce you to Dr. Olivia Stewart from Reimbursement in Auckland. So many of you will need to make embryos, and some of you will need a donor as well. So I've asked Dr. Stewart to talk about medical preparation. Just by way of introduction, Olivia is the only Maori female fertility subspecialist in New Zealand, and one of the few to have done the CREI subspecialist training, which really means, she's a reproductive endocrinologist and can tell you anything you like about fertility. She specializes in fertility preservation, in fertility and gynecological ultrasound, as well as male infertility too. She practices in private obstetrics through birthright, and her spare time is spent with the Tamariki, her wanu, and her huskies. Welcome, Dr. Stewart. It's great to have you. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you so much.
That's great. If you want to share your screen with us, you can do that.
Wonderful.
While we're fiddling out with that, so Dr. Stewart's going to really talk about, a bit about sperm testing, about egg donor issues that you should be looking at, and how you can work with a New Zealand clinic on all those things. Down the bottom, there should be a share screen button.
Yes.
With an arrow there.
But it's, sorry, there's lots of exclamation marks. Hold and shift it down.
You can
desktop.
You can just talk if you like and read it off and talk. We don't really need to see the slides if you don't.
Sorry, guys. Try one more thing. I can just skip this a bit. Oh, okay, let's leave it. Yeah, sorry, it's just asking me to leave the meeting so I can start sharing.
Oh, right.
That's weird.
Yeah, that's odd. Let me check here. If
Oh.
you like,
Actually, sorry, it's come up now. I wonder if I can just,
yeah, there we go. That's it.
is that,
It working.
yay.
That's great.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, hi everybody. My name's Olivia, Dr. Olivia Stewart, and I'm a fertility specialist up in Auckland. And just of note, Sam, I work for Fertility Associates.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay. But also an obstetrician at Birthright in Auckland here. Yes, and I'm of Ngāpuhi and Ngāti Kahununu descent. And yeah, really looking after the Auckland area, but also I represent Fertility Associates up in Northland. So this is what I'm going to be talking about today, and we're going to be firstly talking about who needs an egg donor, why would people want to donate their eggs, what makes the ideal egg donor, the different types of egg donors that you can be, the process, and then commonly asked questions at the end. So firstly, who needs an egg donor? And I'm presuming a lot of our audience today are in this scenario where either they're same-sex male couples requiring not only an egg donor but also a surrogate to have their families. There are also women who have premature and early menopause, or that they're older women. They've got lower ovarian reserves, so they've got fewer eggs and lower quality eggs, or where they've been through lots of IVF treatment using their own eggs and haven't had any success. Obviously, some conditions as well can be passed on through the maternal line, and so instead of passing that on to offspring, some women choose to use an egg donor to avoid passing those conditions on to their offspring. So this really shows how age is so important for us as women and impacting on our fertility. You'd all probably know that we're all born with our eggs, and unlike men who are making sperm every day for the rest of their lives, we're born with about 600,000 eggs. We are slowly losing our eggs. We're not making them as we're getting older. By about the age of 35, we have 10% of our eggs left. And then by the menopause, which on average is around the age of 51, that's when our eggs have run out. So not only do we have fewer eggs as we're getting older, our eggs are the same age that we are as well. So as we're getting older, our eggs are older. They're more likely to be genetically abnormal, more likely to make genetically abnormal embryos. So we're hit with a bit of a triple whammy where our chances of having a baby are going down, our risk of miscarriage is going up, and our risk of having a baby with a chromosomal abnormality like Down syndrome is also going up as we get older as well. Whereas if we are in this scenario, if we use an egg donor from a younger, healthier woman, we could maintain those really high chances of having a baby. So the ideal characteristics of a suitable egg donor, really those that would give you the best chance of a baby using their eggs. So we talked about age and how important that is, but also women that don't have any pre-existing medical conditions or any genetic conditions that might run in their family that could be passed on to your offspring, or any infections, obviously, that could be passed on to you or your babies. Lifestyle factors are really important as well. So we know that smoking reduces our ovarian reserve, halves our chances of getting pregnant, and more than doubles our risk of miscarriage. So ideally a non-smoking egg donor would give you the best chance of a baby. Those with high BMI as well, we do see that require a lot more stimulation to respond, and often we get poor responses from women with high BMI. But also higher BMI ladies have higher anaesthetic risks from their surgical egg collection procedures. And obviously best for them to have a reasonable egg reserve themselves, because some women have lower egg reserves for their age group. And what we do know is that as we're getting towards the end of our reproductive lives with the lower number of eggs in our egg reserve, generally overall they tend to be lower quality, and that we've used up our best quality eggs when we're younger. The process really depends on the type of egg donation, but there are 3 phases that every egg donor and recipient needs to go through. And so these include the preparation and screening, the treatment phase, and also the allocation or the matching up of the donor and their recipients. So historically, people would have family members or friends who would offer, or they would approach to be an egg donor for them. And this is what we'd call a personal egg donor, when they've already found each other and matched up before they come to see us at the clinic. Then due to word of mouth or campaign drives, we have egg donors coming in to offer their services, and that's when we can match them up with a recipient, and they have a one-to-one egg donor relationship. And really only in the last few years have we been able to start our egg bank, and that's largely due to the fast freeze vitrification method of freezing eggs, which has a much better survival of eggs being frozen and thawed out later compared to the slow freeze method that we used before. And so now we've been able to recruit egg donors from young healthy women. They go through all the process and they freeze their eggs, and we actually have an egg bank now. So with an egg bank donor, they come to our clinic, they go through all the preparation and screening, the counselling, they go through the treatment, they freeze their eggs, those eggs are quarantined for 12 weeks, and then they are later allocated or matched up with a recipient. The bonuses about this is that it really streamlines the process for both not only the donor but also the recipient. So it's a shorter time to starting and finishing their treatment for both the donor, but it also is a much more streamlined process for the recipients, because once they get to the top of the egg bank waitlist, their eggs and their donors have already gone through all of that process of screening, taking treatment, and the eggs have been frozen and quarantined, so they can really start treatment as soon as they can. The other bonuses about it is that our egg donors are able to help more than one recipient than often. So often more than one recipient can benefit and create their own families from the one donor. They go through the extensive counselling as well as the recipients, and sometimes if both parties are keen to meet up, they can also meet up and meet each other. With one-to-one donation, so both the donor and the recipients fill out a non-identifying profile, and so we share these with one another, and some donors and recipients have special requirements, such as they prefer their donor to be the same ethnicity as them. So we match them together. And once they accept one another, then they can go through that pre-treatment and treatment phase. With the treatment, all of those eggs collected from that treatment cycle are allocated to the recipient couple. And so with personal donorship, it can really fast track things as well, whereas where the allocation and matching of a donor and a recipient has already happened before they come into the clinic. So as soon as they come to the clinic, they can start that preparation and screening phase, and a much faster time to get to the treatment phase. However, not everybody is so lucky to be able to have somebody to offer this within their social group or within their family. So this just shows how all donors have to go through the same critical processes. So they all go through the same screening process, the treatment phase and the allocation phase, but it really comes down to a different pathway depending on the type of egg donor that you're going to be. So personal donors can be a lot faster because they've already matched up with one another before they come to the clinic. So they can go through the counselling and testing phase together, and then start treatment. And they still go through that quarantine phase. The egg bank donors have already gone through all of this phase. So by the time a couple of recipients get to the top of the egg bank wait list, they can basically start their treatment. So that's also quite a streamlined process. With the one-to-one donors, they do have to submit their profiles. We do have to match them up, and they do have to agree on one another. So they have to figure out that they're right for you and you're right for them before starting the treatment phase. So the first stage for anybody wanting to donate their eggs is to touch base with our clinic, and particularly our donor coordinators. And what they really do is they facilitate all of the first initial stage of registration and screening. So they initiate all our basic screening tests. They'll get you to fill out a health and lifestyle declaration, as well as a donor reimbursement form. And this is the part where you're really writing a profile about yourself in a non-identifying way. Then once all your results are back, the coordinator will discuss these results with you, look at the different pathways and see which egg donor pathway you would like to go down, if not already, if you're a personal donor, and just decide that this is if this is something that you would like to do, make it a doctor's appointment as well as a counsellor's appointment. The doctor's appointment is a 30-minute consultation where we go through your medical history, any surgery that you might have had, any pregnancies or complications from those pregnancies. Look at any genetic conditions in your family that may be hereditary or have a hereditary component. Organise the genetic testing, which is we use Invitae over in the States, and we use their 308 gene mutation panel via buccal swab. And so the importance of this is that with both our donors and our recipients, they're both going through this genetic testing. And so and it's critical that we obviously don't match up couples that are carriers for the same genetic conditions. Otherwise, they're at risk of having a baby with a genetic condition. We also discuss how the treatment process is going to work. And a pelvic ultrasound scan is performed at the same time, really making sure that there's no other gynecological concerns or cysts on the ovaries or pathology that's going to make IVF more difficult for you, more risky, and also just make sure that the ovaries are nicely located to the vaginal walls and safe to do any collection. Counselling is a really critical part of the step, and it's about a 60-minute consultation with one of our counsellors. It's really trying to discuss any feelings that you might already have or may come up during the process of donating your eggs. They'll also discuss legal aspects such as non-anonymity, which is essential in New Zealand, where all egg donors need to be comfortable with putting their name on a registry. So once any children are born and reach the age of 18 and want to know more about their biological origins, they can choose to contact them if they wish. Also, altruism is a really important factor in New Zealand, and these legal aspects are really centred around the wellbeing of the unborn child. So donors have to be essentially doing it from the kindness of their heart and a genuine need to do it, not being money driven. However, in saying that, there is a reimbursement fee that does go along with egg donorship in New Zealand, but also all reasonable travel costs, accommodation costs are paid for and covered by the recipients, so that the donor is not left out of pocket in any way. If you have a partner, it's really important that they also attend the counselling process, because it's important for them to have thought about all of these things along the way as well. They also need to be on board, and they also need to sign your consent forms as well, because you're in a relationship with them. Some scenarios you need an ECART application to the Ethics Committee of New Zealand, such as egg donorship within immediate family members, if you're using both an egg donor and a sperm donor, if you're using embryos that are being donated, or surrogacy. And these are scenarios where legally you have to apply to the Ethics Committee of New Zealand. They have a meeting every 12 weeks, but limited sort of case numbers of each visit. So you might not necessarily get into the next meeting for approval. So it can be a few months wait and the counsellors and the doctors help to put through that application and submit that application on your behalf. Then finally, after that stage, once you've completed all of the preparation, the screening, the counselling, then it confirmed your donor pathway, then you can move to the next step, which is treatment. Recipients have to go through the same essential steps as donors. So they too meet with and liaise with our egg donor coordinators. They have a doctor's consultation. They too need to submit a non-identifying profile and go through the implications counselling with an approved counsellor. They choose the donor pathway that they also wish to go, which pathway they would like to go down if they haven't already come forward with their own personal donor. And then treatment is the culmination of all the efforts of both the donors and the recipients thus far. And so this starts off for the egg donor with a drug teach appointment with one of the nurses. This is often virtual now in the times of the pandemic, and women are taught how to use the medications, how the cycle is going to work, and what they need to do when. So they're ready and prepared before their cycle starts. This is an overview of how an egg freezing IVF cycle works, and it's all started from the first day of a woman's period, and then from the second day she would start stimulating her ovaries with FSH. So this is ovarian stimulation, shortened or abbreviated to STIM, and it's follicle stimulating hormone, the same hormone within our pituitary which usually produces 1 or 2 eggs per month. We're just giving it in a purified, synthetically produced manner, so we know exactly the dose at a heightened dose to try and make as many eggs in her ovaries develop. At the same time, she would add in a second injection daily called an antagonist, and what this is doing is stopping ovulation from occurring while you're growing those eggs in your ovaries. You're having monitoring with scans and blood tests to check that you're responding. And then once you get a good number of follicles within each ovary with a good size, it should contain a good number of mature eggs, you're going to an egg collection. You need to take a trigger injection, and this matures the eggs to the final stage of maturation, so they're fertilizable, and releases them from the wall of the follicle. So when we come in for the egg collection, they're floating free in the follicular fluid. We do an egg retrieval 36 hours later after the egg collection, and that involves IV sedation. We pop a vaginal ultrasound probe inside the vagina and up against each ovary wall with a little needle on top. We take all of the eggs from each ovary and freeze them. So the time at the clinic during the treatment, really the drug teach now is mostly done virtually. You have 2 or 3 scans at the clinic. The blood tests, you might have 2 or 3 blood tests at lab tests. You need the day off work for your egg retrieval. You can't drive a car or operate machinery for 24 hours after the sedation that we give, but most women are able to go back to work the next day. Our eggs are quarantined for 12 weeks, and this really comes down to certain infections which can take up to 12 weeks to show in your bloodstream once you've been exposed, such as HIV. So we do baseline screening, and then 12 weeks later, after we've taken the eggs and frozen them, we do another test for HIV and other infections. And if it's still negative, then the quarantine is complete and those eggs can be released to be used. Male couples not only have to go through that whole process, but also surrogacy. This is a very steep learning curve for them, because not only are they needing to understand a menstrual cycle and IVF with their egg donor, but also pregnancy and childbirth with their surrogate. They're also having to learn to find roles that are helpful in being supportive to both women during the IVF phase and during the pregnancy phase. So there's a lot of challenges for men. And also the birth mother and her partner are the legal parents of the children. So the male couple have to adopt their child within the first 28 days after the birth. So there's a lot of extensive counselling and legal surrogacy consultation, as well as application to oranga tamariki before the IVF phase, but as well as during the pregnancy to help facilitate this process. We talked about donor reimbursement. It's accepted that donors are doing it from the kindness of their heart for altruistic reasons within New Zealand, but there is a small fee that donors can be reimbursed after egg collection, as well as covering all the travel and accommodation costs, time off work, so that donors aren't out of pocket. Commonly asked questions. Age, we touched on why that is important. It doesn't mean that you have to be under 37 to donate your eggs. Obviously, some family members are a bit older and they want to maintain their family lines, but just as long as you're aware that that can reduce your chances, and we talked to you about that at the doctor's consultation. You don't necessarily need to have completed your family already. And certainly leading on from that is no, donating your eggs doesn't reduce your chances of having your own baby later on, and it doesn't bring menopause earlier. Where most of our eggs are dying, only 400 are ovulating in a lifetime. So what we're doing is just recruiting and rescuing them from that programmed cell death. You can certainly still donate your eggs if you've had your tubes tied or had a hysterectomy and your uterus removed, because your ovaries are still there and they're still producing eggs. We have lots of information on our website as well, and there's some links there that might be of interest to you. So thank you for your time.
That's great. That's really useful, Olivia. Look, a few questions have come in. Can a family who's made embryos overseas for a first journey and then they found a surrogate in New Zealand, does fertility associates allow them to bring those embryos back to New Zealand?
Yes, so yeah, absolutely. It's not us allowing it. They are allowed to do that, but to do a surrogacy agreement within New Zealand, they have to abide by all the surrogacy rules and legalities. So their surrogate and them both have to have separate independent legal consultation with a surrogacy lawyer. They need to see the counsellors and have implications testing.
Yep.
And I mean, we used to have a lot of reproductive tourism pre-pandemic. The main stumbling block at the moment still is bringing embryos back, or bringing sperm, bringing eggs, bringing anything overseas, because the couriers who usually the embryologists that ship them across, and they carry them across on the airplane with them. They have to go, at the moment, they've been having to go through quarantine when they get back. So it doesn't make it, it's not been a viable option.
No,
when we no longer have MIQ for that process, then that's when that will start to lift, and people will be able to bring their eggs, their sperm, their embryos back from overseas.
Yeah, and it's
at the moment, and you wouldn't want to risk putting it into a.
Sure. Is Fertility Associates importing frozen eggs into New Zealand at all?
We're not. So to be able to create and donate eggs in New Zealand, even if they're brought from overseas, they need to be non-anonymous donors, and they need to be doing it from the kindness of their heart. So, places where that's more readily available, such as the States, that's those legal requirements aren't happening. So they're getting paid large amounts of money, and they're all anonymous. So we're not legally able to do that at this stage until they fulfil the legal requirements within New Zealand.
Right, but if they were a known donor who were counselled and altruistic, then I assume the eggs could be imported?
Yes. Yeah. Again, there would be that MIQ issue currently.
Yeah.
I'm not aware of the couriers starting back up as yet, because until they no longer have to do MIQ, then that's not a feasible option.
Yeah. All right. Look, that's great. Thanks a heap. We've run out of time, but thank you. That's just wonderful. Okay. I'm now going to introduce to you all our next speaker, Fiona Gardner. So Fiona's a registered social worker. She's worked in the UK, in Guernsey, in New Zealand, and her expertise is in adoption work. She's got over 20 years knowledge in this field. Now as a senior advisor in the intercountry adoption team in New Zealand. Let me just bring up her video for you. For the past 4 years, Fiona's been the ministry's coordinator for international surrogacy, and she's the initial contact person for intending parents. So she's seen the lifelong importance of people, kids knowing their story and where they come from, their waka papa. So we're really pleased to have her in for the first time, really, to this webinar series. Fiona, welcome.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm just going to get my presentation up.
Great, great.
Oh. And thank you, Sam, for inviting me. It is indeed, I think, the first time that Oranga Tamariki has presented. As said, I'm Fiona Gardner and I work for Adoption Services, and I've been asked to talk about the role that Oranga Tamariki has in domestic and international surrogacy arrangements. I'm aware that my talks, I'm crammed a lot into 15 minutes. So this, I've done a PowerPoint that I can share with, that Sam can share with you afterwards, just in case you wish to refer to anything that I've talked about. So this session is twofold. It's about how to promote the long-term needs of children through surrogacy, and also to provide an overview of our role in adoption applications for surrogacy arrangements. The first thing to note is that Oranga Tamariki, we are the Ministry for Children, and so we do have some rights and obligations. Of particular importance to us is UNCROC, which is New Zealand in 1993 became a signatory to the Convention on the Rights of Children. So those are 54 articles that talk about best interests of children and promoting their well-being. Of particular interest in surrogacy, we're interested in Article 3, which states the best interests of children be the primary consideration in all actions and decision-makings concerning children. Article 8 says it recognises that children have a right to their biological and cultural heritage. Article 12 is about hearing the voice of the child, which is particularly difficult when we're talking about babies who don't have a voice, and as parents you're making decisions for them. And Article 17, which is a child has a right to be informed. The other guidelines that we find incredibly useful with regard to surrogacy arrangements is the Verona Principles. It's quite a short document and I would encourage you to have a look at it. It was released in February last year, and it talks about covering about the rights of all those involved in a surrogacy arrangement. So they've got 18 principles, and they look at looking at everybody involved in a surrogacy arrangement, consent of surrogacy parents and intending parents. It's a look about the transparency in financial arrangements, and also that there isn't any selling or exploitation or trafficking of children. So the 18 principles of use for us is the principle 1 is about human dignity, and principle 2, human dignity for all involved. Principle 2 is children as independent right owners. The best interest of children is principle 6, and principle 11 we're particularly interested is protection of identity and access to origins. I do work in adoption services, so I have had lots of experience with talking to adult adoptees who were placed for adoption in the closed era, and what we're beginning to see with donor conceived children is similar experiences that adopted people had in the closed era. So the lessons that we've learned from past adoptions, which are in the closed area, is the importance of openness and a child growing up knowing their story from a young age, that there's no family secrets, and that for an adopted person, an adult adopted person, what has been important is about their whakapapa, knowing where they came from, their origins, and the impact that that has on future generations too. And you just need to look at the Missing Pieces program just to know how much that resonates with people, to know their genetic roots. It's important about knowing the genetic medical history for the child and also for future generations. And lessons learned from past adoptions is that we want children to have a relationship with their parents so that they can freely talk about questions about their identity. We're aware about the lifelong implications and the different challenges at different stages, and once again, the intergenerational impact. Consideration for donor-conceived children. From our experience, it's highly likely that donor-conceived people will encounter some identity issues, questions during their lifetime, and it can generate strong emotions at various stages of their lives, e.g. in puberty or adolescence or becoming a parent themselves. In our view, it's natural for a donor-conceived child to know where they come from, who they look like, and discover missing parts of their biological background. Again, with donor-conceived children, from lessons learned from the past, it's the importance of openness. I think there is a concern internationally when you're reading literature and looking at donor-conceived people support groups that have been established, that maybe for children growing up with heterosexual parents, that they're assuming that the people raising them are both their genetic parents. So the issue for them, if they're not being told of their story, is about being genetically unrelated to one of their parents, and that the parents have concealed the truth from them. With DNA testing, it's so much more easier to find out about yourself and your roots. So best to be open. For donor-conceived children, for the information that they don't have maybe so much about their genetic parent, one of the genetic parents, it's important that they know about their family history as well as a medical history. If you're using a donor, we wish you to consider your comfort levels with sharing your child's story with them and what you feel comfortable and open about sharing. Be prepared if you're using an anonymous donor that you'll be asked questions, children will ask, and it's important that you know and that you practice how to share the information that you have and how to say that you don't know. One of the things, maybe with the American international surrogacies, is about being able to find out about registers for future use for children to be able to access when they're older. Some statistics you might find of use in terms of Oranga Tamariki's involvement. For the fiscal year, so that's July 2020 to July 2020 to June 2021, Oranga Tamariki, we wrote 19 reports for ECART, and I'll explain that a bit later. And the Section 10 adoption reports that we did for court, we wrote 42 in total. And I apologise if I said the wrong number because my space is in the way. So we wrote 41, 22 were for domestic surrogacy, and 19 were for international surrogacy. On the international surrogacy side, I had to do some gathering of information over a 5-year period for the Law Commission that's looking at surrogacy. So over the 5-year period from 2016 to 2020, there were 82 international surrogacy referrals, and 50% of these children that were created, there was a use of an anonymous donor. So the anonymous donor, it ranges the information from a few points about the donor, for example, their height, eye colour, ethnicity, good health with no photos, to having one photo and several sentences, to a pseudonym for the first name with photos and up to 30 pages of information, but no means to contact them. So there is a great discrepancy about anonymous donors and how much information is shared. I'm pointing this out because in New Zealand, under the Heart Act, as of 2005, we're not allowed to use anonymous donors. So it's almost like there's a two-tiered system for children being created through surrogacy in New Zealand. They have the right to have information about their genetic parent, but if you're going through international surrogacy, that is not a requirement. I'm mindful that there are law commissions, so who knows, that space may change. You might also find it helpful, I know we're talking about surrogacy, but in terms of Oranga Tamariki, who are more known for adoptions of non-kin within New Zealand with families that are in the adoption pool, domestic adoption pool, in that same fiscal year for 2020 2020 to 2021, there was only 13 adoptions that occurred. So from that, you can see that there is a much greater surrogacy is a bigger way now of creating families. When I joined the services 15 years ago, there was about 100 adoptions a year happening in New Zealand. So the landscape has certainly changed. In terms of the involvement for OT with a domestic surrogacy and what our involvement is, you would have heard that if you're doing domestic surrogacy, you would need to present paperwork to the ethics committee, to ECART, and part of the process is an interim assessment, which is completed by ourselves. It involves that you undertake a medical reference, police checks, and permission for OT to check our database. The social worker would come out and visit you and talk about your situation and your plans. And if everything's okay and there's no big risk factors or warnings, signs, we would provide you with a letter that you would attach to your dossier to ECART. Once a surrogate is pregnant, a full adoption assessment is completed. Once the baby is born, the social worker issues a placement approval so baby can come to the care of yourselves. When the adoption application is lodged in court, the New Zealand Family Court asks adoption services to complete a report under Section 10 of the Adoption Act of 1955. We know that it is very old and very not fit for purpose, but we're bound by the legal requirements and the laws of the land. So we're asked to comment on about you being fit and proper to have the day-to-day care of your child and promote their best interests. It's under Section 11. International surrogacy, it's a little bit more complicated, and Margaret already adhered to. So what we used to do 2 years pre-COVID has changed a lot. Usually we get to know about a surrogate arrangement. It can be that people ring up either myself directly, or they can ring up the site, and adoption services site, and it gets referred to me, and we have a discussion about what your plans are. I'm always saying, please get legal advice. And I work closely with the 3 lawyers in New Zealand that know a lot about surrogacy. So that's Margaret Casey, who you've met, and Jennifer Wayman, who'll be on next after me, I believe, and Stuart Daly's. Is very, very helpful to work with people who know the system and who know what they're talking about, basically, and we all help each other with your arrangements. So OT, we work with the other governments involved too, and so it involves myself, Immigration New Zealand, DIA, MFAT, and the family courts. It's a complex process and it's constantly changing, but what you would need to know is that once your surrogate is pregnant, so around 12 weeks, you would either contact myself or your lawyer will contact me, and we will I will send a referral to the relevant site to send you an application pack, and a social worker would be allocated to you to complete an assessment. So the adoption application pack, which is emailed out to you, it's got an assessment form, the medical reports, they're not over the top, they're quite generalised. We ask for your consent for a police check for New Zealand, and if you've lived in Australia, we can also do that. The consent for us to check our database. You also need to provide 2 forms of ID and the details for 2 references. One needs to be a family member and the other needs to be a close friend. We do police checks for you from any country that you've lived in for more than 6 months over 18 years. And that can sometimes be a bit difficult for people to get those, particularly with COVID. We found that for some countries that could be quite difficult. If there are adults living in your home who are over 18, they need to provide consent for a police check and to check our databases as well. The assessment that a social worker carries out, we look at core needs of children, which covers attachment, identity, integrity, resilience, safety and support, and we explore with you about how you'll meet them. For surrogacy arrangements, social workers, we're particularly interested in specific things. It's not like a full assessment that we would do if you were a non-kin wanting to be in the local domestic pool. So we're wanting to know how you arrange your surrogacy, your journey, the relationships that you developed with the surrogate and with the donors, if you've used them and if you have an ongoing relationship with them, what your plans are to form an attachment with baby during the pregnancy, especially if you're on other sides of the world, and how to form how you form attachment with baby during pregnancy and following birth. We also look at safe sleep practice, and most importantly, we'll talk with you about what your plans are about how you will tell your children their story. We're great believers that the earlier the better, and that when babies are babies, it's quite good to be able to practice your story. So in summary, it's important about the rights of children and that they know their story right from the beginning, so there's no surprises for them. The importance for you as parents about being open with your children about their story, no surprises. And if choosing a donor, the importance of having access to information about the family history, health and identity in order to share these with the child, and ideally to have a relationship with them, so in the future if issues arise you can be able to talk to them as well. And I've also given an explanation of the adoption services role.
That's great. Thank you so much, Fiona. That's really great. I wish we had a service like yours here in Australia. It's very thorough. Well, this is actually good to segue now, because we're now going to hear from a young adult born via surrogacy who lives in Auckland, to see how her family told her about the process. Obviously, Alice Nelson was born a long time before the government had these kind of processes in place. I'm going to introduce her. She's 30 years old. She's one of twins born via gestational surrogacy in the UK 30 years ago, which means it was 1992. Is it right?
91.
91, okay.
Yeah.
So Alice came to Auckland in 2009 after a high school gap year and ended up at university here and staying on. New Zealand was so good that her family came over too. She's a personal trainer and happily settled in life with a partner and his kids. So we're always keen when we do these seminars to hear from young adults, just to see what it's like. A lot of parents say to me, oh, what am I going to tell my kids? You know, will it muck them up? You know, because they were born differently. So Alice, tell us, did your parents use an egg donor?
No, we were host surrogacy. So my father and my mother's, and then our surrogate mother carried us and gave birth to us. We have always been told
there wouldn't have been much support back then. I mean, how did your parents find a surrogate? Do you know?
Through the COTS organisation in the UK.
Yep.
That was my surrogate mother was actually the chairperson of that at the time.
Wow.
And amazing lady. We've known her since we were born. Everything was really open.
Yeah.
Mum had a surrogate that fell through, so she ended up her and Kim became friends, and then Kim said, well, hey, you know what, I feel really bad for you, I'll be your surrogate.
Yeah, amazing. And Kim had carried before, I think, hadn't she?
Yes, she had once before, I think in the late 80s.
Yeah. Oh wow. And then okay, so when everybody asks me, when should I tell my kids about how they were created? I mean, do you remember when that happened for you?
As early as I can remember, Mum and Dad were always super open about it. They never wanted there to be any secrets. They always told us in a way that we were special, just how hard they fought to have us. And just Kim was known as sort of our auntie.
Yeah.
In a way, and we grew up with her children around as well, so it's really lovely.
Yeah, wow. And so did you sort of, so you're quite, you know her kids quite well, Kim's kids as well, do you? They're part of
not so much now. We do know them, fairly well, but we don't keep in contact too much, just because I'm over this side of the world. But whenever I do go back, I do go and see them.
Yeah, wow, that's amazing. I mean, for you, was it important to know that there were other kids around who are born via surrogacy too? Was that important to you, or did you not care?
I didn't really care. I just thought that that was just our birth, really. We weren't made to feel any different because we'd come into the world that way. My mum's friend, Mark, I'm actually, my best friend is a surrogate child as well. So I've grown up around her the majority of my life too.
Yeah, that's great. Also another UK friend.
Yep.
Oh, that's really nice. I mean, what did you tell stuff to your friends at school when you were young about how you were brought into the world?
I actually did a couple of school presentations on it.
Right.
And yeah, just told everyone was really supportive. No one was really mean or anything about it. They were just interested to know because it was different.
Yeah, because I mean, you would have been one of the earlier babies in the UK born by surrogacy, I suppose.
I think we were the first surrogate twins in Britain. We were front page news all over the world at the time.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, have you seen a change in attitudes, do you think, in the last sort of 20 years to surrogacy?
I think it's a lot more accepting now, and it's a lot more popular. Back then, it wasn't really heard of. Mum had to fight the UK media, and she had doctors calling her up saying, "Give up, it's not going to happen." Whereas now, I think through, at least in the UK, through the work of my surrogate mum and COPS, they really brought a lot of that around and changed the laws in Parliament too.
That's right. Yeah. Amazing work. You're right. I mean, I just wish we had organisations that strong to this part of the world.
Yeah,
it's great because COTS is still sort of helping match UK couples with surrogates, aren't they?
Yes, they are. I'm not. Is there something like that out here?
No, it's more do it yourself out here. There are forums online to do it. I mean, Surrogacy Australia has a service in Australia, but they're always struggling to find surrogates. I mean, so another question for you. I mean, do you get questions sort of a lot from other people about how you were created? Do people sort of ask a lot? Do they pry?
Not really, not now. When I do, I don't talk about it too much because again, it kind of just feels like that's just part of that. That's my life. Yeah. But when I do tell people, a lot of people know more what surrogacy is now, whereas growing up, people didn't necessarily know, so you did have to explain it a lot more. Like I told my boss the other week, and she was like, "Oh wow, that's amazing!" Like I didn't have to explain anything.
Yeah. What was the reason why your mum couldn't carry?
She had her ovaries removed. She had a hysterectomy. Right. She tried to carry it, then she had a miscarriage. Yeah. And it just didn't work.
Yeah, that's quite common.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, what tips would you give new parents in terms of telling their kids? A lot of the heterosexual couples are worried, will my child be okay with the fact that I didn't carry them, that maybe it wasn't even my eggs? What would you say to those women?
I would just say be as open and honest as you can, because that made such a difference growing up knowing that. Yeah. I think if it was something that we'd found out later, it would have been very hard to handle. Just thinking that this is mum and dad, and then finding out that there's other stories around it. But yeah, just be open, and just so long as the kids know that they're loved and they're happy and looked after, I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah. No, that's great. That's terrific advice. Thank you so much, Alice, for talking to us. It's really good, and probably inspiring some of these intending parents about thinking maybe they can do this. Yeah,
definitely, 100%. Good luck to everyone.
Thank you, Alice. That's great. All right.
Thanks.
Now we're going to now switch over to surrogacy and donor IVF in Georgia, because that's become an increasingly popular destination, particularly for New Zealanders. And we're going to be joined by Dr. Chuck Vianney from Reparat in Georgia. as well as Jennifer Wademan from Wellington, because Jennifer is one of those 3 lawyers in New Zealand who knows this area, and Jennifer's done a lot of these Georgian cases. Dr. Chuck Vianney is a reproductive endocrinologist like Olivia was. She's got over 25 years experience. She's helped thousands of intended parents with creating children. And she's presented work around the world at congresses. So welcome, Dr. Chuck Vianney. It's great to see you. I know we sent a lot of patients to you from Australia in recent times. And Jennifer, welcome. It's great to see you. First time we've had you in one of our events. This is great to have someone who's got local experience of working with parents, New Zealand parents in this area.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
That's great. One of the issues, of course, for Georgia is Georgia doesn't award a local passport. So I'll probably get Jennifer to talk a bit about how that works for New Zealand couples and what the exit times are. But maybe we'll start with Dr. Chuck Vianney to talk to us a bit about how surrogacy works in Georgia, the rules around it.
Hello, thank you, Sam. I'm Dr. Chuck Vianney from Georgian American Center for Reproductive Medicine Report. I will share now my screen.
That's great.
Okay. So I would like to represent my clinic in Georgia for surrogacy and donation. The report is an international destination for fertility treatment. We receive patients from 25 countries, including Canada, United States, United Kingdom, Israel, China, and etc. Our protocol meets with American standards. We represent full service IVF clinic with the biggest chain of IVF clinics in Georgia, 3 branches in different cities with more than 800 cycles per year, and 4,500 babies were born. This is our clinic in Tbilisi, in city of capital city of Georgia. Georgia is a small country rich in history, cultural traditions, located in the crossroad of Western Asia and Eastern Europe. This site is very beautiful and nice. The law of Georgia grants parenthood to couples who are not surrogate mothers. Report clinic owns a diverse online database for egg donors and surrogate mother with open profile and of candidates of intended parents. In other words, surrogate mothers are not entitled to claim parenthood, and children born of them immediately upon birth receive birth certificates with the name of their future parents indicated. The law of Georgia of healthcare allows to use egg donation and surrogacy for IVF treatment for infertile couples. Georgian legislation recognizes only a male and female as a couple, married or living together at least 1 year. So donation available for heterosexual couples, single woman, no age limitation theories. Surrogacy available for heterosexual couple, and limitation just only no single parents on the same couples. The possible surrogacy option for intended parent who can offer are shipped embryo surrogacy program, donor egg surrogacy program, own egg surrogacy program, egg donation guaranteed program. Reproductive clinic is a facility where all medical manipulation procedures, examination, and checkup are done. IVF Tours Georgia is a house agency located in the clinic building, which has own team of program managers and coordinators who are taking care for comfortable surrogacy journey for intended parents and surrogate mothers within 24/7 care and support. They are intermediary circle between clinic, between couple and doctor and surrogate mothers. So the choosing egg donation, as I mentioned above, is open. So we have age limitation from 18 to 30-year-old woman. We strictly check all candidates. So the first step of choosing egg donor is to check their ultrasound to be sure that they have more than 12 to 15 follicles in each ovary. Then we do step-by-step the examination, started with the biopsies, then hormonal profile, screening of family medical history, infectious disease, genetic text, karyotyping is included in every patient, endocrine assay, complete blood assay, physical examination, and career mapping is up to a patient. If they want, we can offer them. Then in IVF tours, we have several programs with guaranteed programs. So this is what I wanted to present. Thank you for your attention. Now I would like to invite Mr. Jennifer Waterman to share information about immigration and exit processes. Thank you very much.
That's great. Thanks, Dr. Chakviani. I assume Jennifer, this is probably a question for you, that the New Zealand couples you've helped in Georgia have travelled over there to make embryos pre-COVID. Would that be right?
Well, most of them are have gone over pre-COVID. Some are still going over. Otherwise, we're dealing with some who are shipping embryos.
Okay, great.
Mm.
So they have been able to ship.
Now, bear with me. I've still got the shared screen.
Yeah, so Dr. Chakviani, could you just unshare your screen? Close your...
Okay, thank you. So sorry.
That's great.
Oh, stop share. Sorry.
There we go. Fantastic. So what I really want to do is take everybody from the stage where their pregnancy's been confirmed. Now, in terms of what we mean by that from a legal perspective, we're looking at that 12-week scan when we've got some confidence in the viability of the pregnancy. And as you will have heard from Fiona and others, when that happens, we move to involve orangatamariki. So the referral goes through to them and they start the assessment process. Now, the assessment process is the same with Georgian surrogacies as any of the others, but there is one little extra step that we need to consider. And that is that, as Sam said, Georgia doesn't issue a Georgian passport to children born through international surrogacy. So what we end up with is a situation where New Zealand babies born through surrogacy in Georgia are essentially stateless. They can't get a passport from Georgia because Georgia won't issue one, but the birth certificate has the intending parents, so the New Zealand parents on it. New Zealand refuses to acknowledge the New Zealand intending parents as the parents of that child, and so the child can't get New Zealand citizenship. So we have a little wrinkle in law that we deal with, and what we end up doing is having the child issued a certificate of identity. Now, to all intents and purposes, a certificate of identity looks very much like a passport. It's issued by Internal Affairs and it's approved when the visa is issued by the minister to allow the child to return to New Zealand for the purpose of adoption. The challenge that faces for parents, and the thing to simply think about in advance, is that can take a little bit more time once the child has been born. And secondly, not all countries will allow a child to transit through there on the way back with a certificate of identity instead of a passport. And we've seen that particularly in the COVID era where countries are a little more apprehensive before looking to say, okay, who can come through? But certainly it creates no actual problem. We have had no difficulty getting children out of Georgia on a certificate of identity, and no difficulty, obviously, getting them in here. What I would say, though, for those who are looking to do surrogacy in Georgia, I have been really impressed by all the clinics over there. We've had a really positive experience with them. We've also had really positive experiences with the government agencies in terms of facilitating what we need to get the children back to New Zealand. The average amount of time I'm seeing is between about 6 weeks and 3 months for all the paperwork to be completed. It's not too bad. And the other thing about Georgia that's really good for New Zealand parents is that New Zealand citizens can stay in Georgia for a year without any kind of visa. So that takes some of the time pressure off them.
Jennifer, 6 weeks to 12 weeks is quite a range.
It is quite a range.
What sort of affects that timeline?
Absolutely. There's two things that I see that affect them. One is where at least one of the intending parents has another nationality. So, for example, I've had clients who have intending parents with New Zealand Chinese passports, and then they can get a Chinese passport for the child. That then needs to come to New Zealand, or well, we need to deal with the New Zealand immigration to get the visa put in that instead of a New Zealand certificate of identity. The second, and something I'm seeing increasingly, and I'll just explain why it's a little concerning, is I'm seeing a number of parents have 2 surrogacies going about 3 months apart. And where that happens, we tend to wait until the second child is born and do the whole process together.
Okay.
What I would just say about that is that we're yet to see those children enter school, but it is going to be interesting for some of those children going through, because they'll be in the same year, in the same class, with different birthdays. Again, it's where I would echo everything everyone else has been saying, which is talk about this from the beginning. If it's not a surprise, if it's not something that's unusual for your family, these children will manage that process as they go through. But increasingly, I'm seeing that. And I think the reason why is because the clinic tends to charge once. You pay for 2 surrogates, but only 1 clinic fee. So Georgia versus the US, there's a significant difference in terms of costs. We're looking at sort of 60,000 versus 200,000, which is a very significant amount of money for people. But these are just some of the things we like to talk about with families before the surrogacy actually begins. Although I tend to find that I'll engage with clients as they're thinking about this process, as they're looking to different countries and thinking about what they can do. That's really helpful, because as I say, if you've got a parent with a dual citizenship, we can look into how that's going to affect the process. Then it's good luck to you for those first 12 weeks. Off they go, do all that, and then come back to me. We've talked a little bit about that certificate of identity, but of course, once we get the children back to New Zealand, we then do the adoption process just like we would if the child's come from the US. We can do it and have done it before the children travel home in certain circumstances, certainly since COVID, and where we've had trouble getting children through with certificates of identity. But now that we're 2+ years into that process, we've got everything down pat, notwithstanding COVID being an issue. One thing parents have been asking me recently, and I like to reassure them, is, well, what happens if Georgia was to go into another lockdown? Can we get in there? We have got well-established protocols. I've drafted all the diplomatic notes. Essentially, that is not a problem. All it means is you need to leave a little bit earlier so you can do your isolation in Georgia before your child's going to be born.
Okay. Do you see, Jennifer, that sometimes just 1 in 10 parent wants to travel? Is that possible for just 1 to travel on their own?
Look, it's absolutely possible to do. What I often see is 1 travels earlier just in case the child is born early. That's particularly the case with twins. I'm a mother of identical twins myself, so I know that they can end up coming early. And I've got one set of parents at the moment where one's going to head out in a few weeks, so it'll be 30 weeks pregnancy, but the second parent's still looking to come out at 40 weeks, just to get both of them back to New Zealand. But yeah, absolutely not a problem. Work being the necessity it is, we often do see that happens. And again, we can facilitate diplomatic notes if we need to do 2 different flights.
Yeah, Dr. Chakviani, I was talking earlier today about surrogate vaccination. What are you seeing in Georgia in terms of surrogates' preparedness to get COVID vaccinated?
So most of our surrogate mother, before they start the program, they have already had the vaccination against of COVID twice, and then during the pregnancy they do booster dose almost. So we do this kind of. So we regulate and check our surrogate mothers to be vaccinated almost, because there is a huge amount of COVID infection cases just now with Omicron type. So we they get the infection. No, we cannot let them just only sit in the houses. You know, they are at least coming once in a month if they have no other problems for checkup. So they are at high risk to get the COVID infection. So we take care about them to be vaccinated at least 2 times.
Okay, that's helpful. Jennifer, you talked before about the Georgian government. Just to clarify for the listeners today, there's not a court process in Georgia, is there? It's administrative.
No. It's an administrative process, and it's about getting the birth certificates issued, and they will often help in ensuring or assisting with us getting the consent documents that we need with the surrogates, and they have been particularly helpful in ensuring that New Zealand intending parents can get into Georgia no matter what lockdowns are going on, so that they can be there for their baby's birth.
Yeah, I mean, we'll talk to some parents on the panel soon about having to come back into MIQ, into quarantine, during COVID, which I know it's hard, yeah.
It's been challenging. I had a couple in 2020 coming back in, and they were coming in with twins. Right. And certainly in New Zealand, what we arranged was they could have additional family then join them in MIQ, right, so that they were able to have some support around them. So there's lots we can do, and it's
okay, so the government has been flexible with that.
It's been flexible in terms of support, but you're going through MIQ and Australia. I mean, obviously it's changing daily at the moment.
But it's still in place, my understanding is it 7 days still in place for MIQ? Is it?
Look, it was 10 days at one point. After 14 days, it literally is changed. It's a changing beast at the moment all the time. One of the challenges we've got is we haven't got any spots that are open, but the government's saying that by the time most of the pregnancies at the moment will be born, we shouldn't be having MIQ. But regardless of that fact, we can deal with it as and when it comes up. That's really the key to think about, and to know that there needs to be some flexibility and that there will be a degree of uncertainty, but we've found a way through in every single one. And we've been having, gosh, Fiona gave you the figures, but there are a lot still going on, even though we're dealing with the challenges of international travel at the moment. It's still going ahead.
Yeah, I've seen that, yeah. One last question coming for Dr. Chakviani was about, let me see, where did I see it? Your programs, are you seeing people are doing the guarantee programs more popularly, or the egg donor surrogacy programs?
We do all kind of programs. So the single IVF treatment program is more popular than guaranteed programs, but we are working with our cooperative programs with the guaranteed programs also, yes.
Okay. The other thing
Vaccination plus surrogacy with guaranteed programs.
Okay. The other question that's coming is if the parents come to you can do the medical IVF part plus the surrogacy agency recruitment part. Is it there's two? You do all parts of it, the surrogate?
We do both parts, and pregnancy care also in the clinic. So all services are in the clinic without any, just only they are going to the deliver maternity house after 36 to 38 weeks to give the birth.
All right, that's great. Right, thank you guys. That's so helpful. It's wonderful. But great to have you both on here talking about it, because yeah, I hadn't realised we had so many New Zealanders who were using Georgia, so it's great.
Yeah, and absolutely, it's really over the last 5 years, it's just grown rapidly. Really has.
Yeah. No, that's great. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, so we're now going to turn to our local surrogate panel of surrogates from here in New Zealand, talking about their journeys. So we've got Emma Williams coming in to join us, and hopefully we've got someone else coming in too soon. But we'll start with Emma because she's here. Hello, good to see you again. That's great. So as you and I know, a lot of people in New Zealand want to try and do it locally because it's just logistically simpler. So we're always keen, to find out what it's like. Let me just say a bit about you so people know. So Emma's a two-time surrogate.
Yeah.
Now, you've done it for a gay couple of friends of yours in Auckland. But interesting enough, you did the IVF over in the USA. Okay. So the first child you carried was in 2008.
2018. Yeah.
18, sorry,
Yeah.
And a girl in a year later.
Yeah. There was a 6-month gap, the required 6-month gap between the first baby being born and then the date of the next transfer with their girl.
Okay, got it.
So quick succession.
Wow. So Emma's in Wanganui with 3 kids of her own and a hubby.
No, single.
Single. Okay, right.
Yeah.
So tell us, Emma, what got you interested in carrying as a surrogate in the first place? Had you been a donor before, for example?
No. So I met someone in passing years ago, probably would have been 7 or 8 years ago now. And she had been a surrogate, but a traditional surrogate numerous times. And it sort of planted the seed for me. And then I sort of went away and I joined the Surrogacy Forum, and I went to a get together there only once, and then just sort of, things got busy in my life. So I let it sort of slip to the slide to the left. Yep. And it wasn't till I reconnected with a couple that I had met there and actually thought, maybe I could actually do this. And I said to my husband at the time, who knew that it had been an interest of mine, whether he would mind me potentially being a surrogate, and he was on board, and it basically went from there.
Yeah, wow. But you didn't know anyone else who'd been a surrogate, did you?
No. I didn't even know that it existed prior to meeting this other surrogate. To me, it was just, you either had kids or you did IVF. I never even knew that it existed, that you could have a baby for other couples.
Yeah.
Obviously lived on the rock.
Your 3 pregnancies, were they fairly straightforward?
My own 3 pregnancies? Yeah, like I had severe morning sickness with all 3 of them, which we thought, had we done the IVF in New Zealand, we thought that may crop up with ECART. I was never hospitalised or anything, but it was all full term. My kids' pregnancies were easier than the surrogate pregnancies.
And that's often the case. I hear that again and again, yeah. I mean, I'm just surprised, given you had bad morning sickness for your 3, you were prepared to do this again for someone.
It's amazing the amount of people that say, why would you do it again? But I guess you don't think about that at the time, and then you learn to live with it. It's just something that you adapt to.
Yeah. Your gay mates, so they needed an egg donor. I mean, I know traditional surrogacy is fairly common in New Zealand. Was it ever discussed that they might use your eggs too, or was that always off the table for you?
No, so it was in the beginning. It was very much on the table as a first option, but due to my intending parents, there were reasons that just wouldn't have made it safe for me, which is why we went through the egg donor route through San Diego. Okay.
And I'm assuming that they chose the US for the donor because there was such a choice of donors there, whereas there's less donors in New Zealand. Was that right?
Yeah, so it basically comes down to the fact that, unfortunately, you can pay for everything in America. Like, if you want it and you've got money, you can get it. Whereas in New Zealand, egg donors, as we know, are just few and far between. They're like a needle in a haystack. And for them, age was a factor for them. They're now both in their early 40s. Mm-hmm. So to wait on an egg donor list or wait to find the miracle of an egg donor, it just wouldn't have worked. And so they had spoken to other couples that had gone through egg donors in San Diego, and they decided that that was the route that they wanted to take.
Okay, got it. Did you have to do counselling in New Zealand beforehand?
Yeah, so I did they were in Auckland, I'm in Wanganui, so I did my counselling in Wellington along with my husband. I only ever did the one counselling session from memory.
Right.
And then they did one in Auckland, but I think that was because we weren't doing e-cart, so we didn't need the list of all the different requirements because we were basically skipping e-cart.
Yeah. Can you tell me what kind of issues should intending parents and surrogates talk about before they go ahead? Give us some tips about what you should cover.
Yeah, so there's so many things now that I think of now, oh, maybe I should have asked that question. For me, so after I had the first surrogate baby, I'm sorry, you're gonna have to ignore if you can hear the dog barking. After I had him, it was smooth sailing and everything was fine. And after I had the second baby, I actually was diagnosed with postnatal depression. It was not something that we had ever discussed in the lead up because it's like, I'd had postnatal depression with my youngest. So it was always in the back of my head, but I just thought, oh no, I'll skate through. So definitely discussing something, as big as that and what support systems would need to be in place for afterwards. And the one question for me that I do still struggle with is I wish I had asked how the intended parents saw birthdays and Christmases. Like, so for myself, birthdays and Christmases in our family are huge. I make a big deal out of it. It's, out of all the holidays, they're the ones that are really important to me, but because everyone's different, it's not the same with the intended parents. So it's sort of like, I want to make a big deal of these babies' birthdays and they not so much. So just it really does for me come down to just those basic questions, like think outside the square of don't just stick with the basic list of where will you be here, or just whatever you can ask it, no matter how big or small.
Yeah, because I assume the relationship after the birth is just as important as the relationship during the pregnancy, isn't it?
Yes, very. Like, if anything, it's even more so important. Yeah. It's especially knowing sort of what role will be played sort of afterwards. So for me, sort of during the pregnancy and immediately afterwards, I was referred to as mum, and even now I get a Mother's Day gift every year that has a photo of the kids with the mum in reference. But there isn't so much of a relationship there. I mean, COVID hasn't helped with that. They're in Auckland who's spent lots of time in lockdown, and I'm in Wanganui who spent not so much time in lockdown. But the relationship afterwards is just as important.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. What kind of support do you need during the pregnancy in terms of just practical stuff?
So, like, if I think about it from if I was to do this again perspective, for me, I would need the intending parents to be present for appointments. With the second baby, I had complications, and there were appointments that I had to attend at the fetal medicine clinic in Wellington, and I did those on my own, which I struggled with because I was having to make decisions for a baby that one wasn't mine, but also genetically wasn't mine, and it was just that was hard. So I think, if I was to do it again, it would be the support around appointments, important scans, and sort of maintaining that connection between myself and the intending parents as well as their baby that I'm growing.
Totally. I mean, a lot of these gay guys don't even understand how many appointments there are during a pregnancy. I mean,
and there's a lot.
Give us an idea of how many we're talking about here.
So for the first for the first 3 months, I did a booking appointment with my midwife, 2 scans, and then I think 1 more midwife appointment at the 12-week mark. Then it was monthly midwife appointments from then until 28 weeks, where it then became fortnightly until 36 weeks, and then weekly. But I also had antibodies in the pregnancies, and it meant that I had to have a scan sort of every month, if not a blood test, and then the scans became fortnightly and weekly. So in that scenario, you wouldn't want them to be flying down from Auckland every week for a scan that's going to probably tell you the same things. But at least for those important ones, I'd have obstetrician appointments, especially more so with the second one. I think I may have had 1 with the first one, and the second one was they were monthly, basically the entire pregnancy.
Yeah. I've had a question come in. Some of the intending parents are nervous about, how will I bond with the child that you're carrying? I mean, are there ways that you can support the bonding between the baby and the intending parents during the pregnancy?
Yeah, I think it's hard for me to answer that one because I carried for 2 men. I suppose if I carried for a heterosexual couple, I'd be able to say, hey, so I did this with my own kids. So I tried to do that with the dads. I refer to them as the dads. So I tried to do that with them, but just sort of put it into more ways that they would understand. It was, I don't know, it's hard to find that connection if it's with 2 men that don't understand the female body or the female emotions, especially more so pregnancy emotions, which, can be here, there, and everywhere. But I know afterwards, once both babies were born, while I was in the hospital, I kept a singlet on me and then sent the dads back to where they were staying once discharged with that same singlet, so that the baby wouldn't feel like they had been sort of taken straight from where they were to just this unknown environment. And I think where maintaining that huge bond during pregnancy is important, because if it's a regular thing, that baby's going to pick up on those voices throughout the pregnancy.
Yeah.
They'll pick up on, okay, that's a familiar voice. I'm safe. I'll be fine. But it still doesn't make it any easier. I mean, both dads, in my eyes, adapted really well. They bonded virtually what I would class as straight away. I didn't notice any struggle, and they've been upfront and honest, and they certainly never mentioned that there was a struggle with bonding.
Yeah.
I know that it does exist, but yeah.
What about the issue of colostrum and breast milk? Did you talk about whether you'd express colostrum or breast milk? I mean, was that...
Oh, I spoke about this at the very first the seminar that I did with you guys before the very first lockdown, so the 2021. And I know at that stage I was the odd one out. So I had not long had Yana. This was in the February, and I'd had Yana in the December. And so I was the surrogate sitting in the, seated area breastfeeding her surrogate baby so that the dads didn't have to pack milk. So for me, I expressed a little bit of colostrum, but it was always a plan that I would breastfeed. So I stayed in the hospital with the dads and breastfed from birth until discharge. And then I started expressing 3 to 4 hourly, and I did that for 3 or 4 months with Yavi, and then for 6 months with Yana. But in between time, I would breastfeed them numerous times a day before they went back to Auckland. So that is a very, I know that's not the norm. It'd probably be a different scenario had I carried for a heterosexual couple. I probably would have said, that's not my place. But I was carrying for 2 dads that, saw the benefit of breast milk and wanted to, for want of a better word, latch onto that. It was mission curing milk, And the only reason I stopped with Yana was because I put 30 kilos of breast milk on the very last flight out of Wanganui in 2020 before it stopped. So, yeah.
And I mean, some people worry that they'll, if they let their breast milk kick in, they'll get cluckier with the baby and miss the baby more because that's coming on. Was that the same happen with you?
No, it's, you know, when I had Yavi, I happily handed him over and said goodbye at the airport right after I'd finished feeding him, and that was fine. And then with Yana, I did things exactly the same way, and it was harder. So it's, you never know. For me, it's, I look back now and there's nothing that I did differently between the two pregnancies that would make one of them harder than the other. But for me, I never, even with my own children, I never bonded through breastfeeding. I bonded through other ways. So for me, breastfeeding was a means to an end. It was, I had milk, they needed milk, so I gave it to them. It was never a bonding experience for me with my children. So I anticipated it wouldn't be for the surrogate children either. And it wasn't.
Yeah. Another question's come in here from the audience. Where's it gone here? How did you find the legal process in New Zealand of doing that? Was that a pain in the ass, or was it okay?
Everyone says it's a pain in the ass, but I'd say the most painful thing of the legal experience with both of those was the cost for the dads, the ridiculous cost. Like, I understand they're there for a reason, but we didn't. I know other parents have hit, you know, roadblocks, but we didn't hit any. They did their OT assessments. It was intrusive, but they passed, and they did that. I used a well-known lawyer in Palmerston North who had done surrogacy, and the dads used Margaret in Auckland for both of them, so also well-known in surrogacy. So I think when it comes to the legal aspect, it's as costly as it is, you're better off going with someone who actually knows what they're doing. They know the law, they know surrogacy inside out. And you're not going to, you know, your normal family lawyer saying, hey, this is what we're doing, and they've got no idea about surrogacy.
Yeah. Did you talk about what sort of relationship you guys would have after birth? You know, what you'd be called and how often there'd be contact?
No, so we didn't talk about that at all, and I wish we had. Yeah. But it's, you know, some things have cropped up between the baby's being born and now, and we just sort of, you know, talk about it and work our way through it. But there's still a relationship there, but not as big of a relationship as what I thought there would be in terms of connection. Yeah. But I know that as the kids get older, they will intend on, you know, explaining it to them a little bit better, you know, how they came about and what their history is, basically. Right. So there is a relationship there. They're on the other side of the world currently. Why you'd travel at the moment, I don't know. But it's I do hear from one of the dads on basically a weekly basis.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Let's talk to Sam Watkins now. Sam's on the line too. She's also a New Zealand surrogate mum to 4 kids of her own, who are all grown up just about, really. The youngest of yours is 9, is it right, Sam?
10, yeah, 10. Yeah. Sorry I'm late, by the way.
No, you're right. That's fine. So you didn't carry for people you knew like Emma did. You saw your intended dad story on Facebook, didn't you?
Yes. One of their sisters had posted something on Facebook, and it was I didn't really intend that to happen. It just kind of happened quite naturally. So yeah.
Had you thought about carrying for a long time before you went on the Facebook forum?
No, I had offered to my brother years previously because his girlfriend couldn't get pregnant, but then they separated. So it was kind of something that I'd offered to do for family, and I'd always said if ever one of my siblings couldn't have children, then I would do it in a heartbeat. But I'd certainly never thought about doing it for people I didn't know. No.
Yeah, wow. So what got you interested in maybe doing it for a couple you didn't know? How did that even?
Well, as I say, it was something that I'd considered anyway. And then when I met the guys, they were just so lovely, and we just had a great connection. We both wanted the same things from the friendship. Yeah. And as I say, it was just something that happened quite naturally. I certainly wasn't going out looking for someone to do, it wasn't on my to-do list, something that I desperately wanted to do. It really was quite an organic thing, the way it all happened, really.
Yeah, nice. Yeah. And I mean, did you do the whole thing in New Zealand? I mean, Emma went to the
yes.
US visa, at home for it.
Yeah, we did the whole thing in New Zealand, yeah. So we went through ECART
and did you remind me, did you use your own eggs or was it donor eggs?
No, I'm too old for my eggs. So they had donor eggs, yeah.
Right. So some people don't realise this actually, that you can be an older woman and carry as a surrogate if you use
absolutely, yeah. Absolutely. So, yeah.
How old were you when you carried for the boys?
So I was 46 when I gave birth. Wow. Yes, 46. So, and that was my concern in the beginning was, look guys, I don't want to mess you around because I think I'm too old, so egg donation is something I'd thought about years ago, but by the time I'd finished my family I was 35. So it, that was something I presumed that surrogacy was the same thing, and that once you've gone 35 you can't do that either. So but no, that's not true at all. And even if you're in menopause, that isn't an issue either. So there are lots of mothers who carry for their sons or daughters, and that age definitely isn't an issue, providing you've had easy births, easy pregnancies, there's been no additional complications, there's absolutely no reason why you can't carry at all.
So where did your recipients find an egg donor from?
Again, Facebook. They went through Facebook as well.
Yeah, okay, right. I've had a question come in. What have been some of the biggest surprises for you during the surrogacy process? What sort of were the hiccups, I suppose?
For us, we found it was dealing with the fertility clinics. Because surrogacy isn't something that's normal at the moment, and especially for a gay couple as well, the processes weren't set up for us at all. It was hard work. It was like pushing water uphill sometimes, and we felt like we were the ones that were driving it rather than them telling us what to do. So I think for me that was probably the hardest bit, was the frustrations of missing ECART dates because we hadn't been given the right information, or just not knowing what was to do next. Initially saying, oh well, it'll only take sort of a year to get through this, and finding that 2 years down the line, it wasn't sort of a 6-month process that what they originally said. It was more like an 18-month process. It's definitely a marathon, not a sprint, that's for sure.
So you've got to have some real patience with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, what kind of qualities do intending parents need to have if they're going to engage in surrogacy locally?
Trust is the biggest thing. The relationship you build, and it goes both ways. IPs are always very concerned, what if the surrogate takes the baby? But for us, what if the IPs walk away and leave us holding a baby we don't want? So, the trust is really, really important. You've got to have that trust between you built up. So taking time to build that relationship is really, really important. And it's definitely, you need to be caring for your surrogate as you would, for example, if your partner was pregnant, or if your sister was pregnant or something like that. You need to have that empathy, and you need to be supporting your surrogate in the same way that you would do your partner if they were pregnant. Because it's hard, we give up our lives and our bodies for, about 2 years, really. The whole process took maybe 2 years. My family missed out on things with me. My husband missed out on things with me. We gave up a lot to do it. And I'm really lucky that I've got a very understanding husband and children. And we're lucky in that the relationship we have is fabulous. The friendship that we have is amazing. But I know that there are surrogacies out there that go wrong.
Yeah.
And the one that usually ends up hurting is the surrogate. And that's heartbreaking for what, and we don't do it for anything other than we want to give someone, we want to create a family, we want to help someone become a parent. And that really is just all the drive that we have. We're not out there for the kudos, and certainly not money or anything. It's just because we want to help, and there's nothing else in it. There really isn't. So just trust. Yeah.
How did your children react when you told them you were going to carry for some people they didn't know?
They were intrigued and quite keen to sort of meet them, and I had them meet the guys before I told them what we were doing. So I wanted, my kids are quite good judges of characters, as am I, but I wanted them to think, yeah, we like these people, and they did. They really liked them, got on really well with them. So when I told them what I was thinking of doing, they were all for it, and now they climb over each other to get hold of little Bubba so that they can play with him, and he's like a cousin to them, and they love the relationship, and we spend time with them, and it's just wonderful. It really is good. Yeah.
Emma, for you, what were the hardest parts of the process for you?
Going to America. Can I say that? Yeah, that was hard for me first time round. So hard that second time round, I went with one of the dads and my mum for that added support. It was just incredibly hard going to America. IVF was straightforward for me. I think the hardest part would have been probably doing a majority of the pregnancy on my own.
Because would it have been better having recipients who are in the same town or city as you?
Definitely, 100%. I have friends at the moment that have officially not matched, but it's just not official yet. And the first thing I said to them was, is your surrogate local? And they said, yeah, she's just across town. And I'm like, thank God for that, because it's hard. Like Auckland and Wanganui, it's only an hour's flight, but there was just so much more support that I needed that I couldn't just say, hey, I need this support and then have it. It's it is emotionally taxing, and like Samantha said, my husband missed out on things, my kids missed out on things, and I missed out on things just because I wasn't able to expend even more energy doing stuff. So for me, it's definitely the hardest part was doing a pregnancy on my own that wasn't mine, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Another question's come in, which Emma's answered previously, but for you, Sam, were there many differences in your surrogate pregnancies compared to your own kids? Was it much harder?
No, not really. No. So I've got 4 children. I carried all of them fairly easily, apart from the usual niggles. It was pretty straightforward. Yeah, it was. I was concerned about that because I was like, well, these aren't my genetics at all. So how is my body going to react to it? But we were really lucky. Fell pregnant first time. Pretty easy pregnancy apart from COVID lockdowns. That was fun. And birth was pretty standard as well. So yeah, we were very lucky.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think, Emma, you said before that your surrogate pregnancies were much harder than your own ones. Yeah. On your body.
Yeah, not just that. It just, I suppose, emotionally, and my kids were all born sort of without complications. Yana, number 2, she was admitted to NICU on night number 2, I think. And then we were in hospital until she was 5 days old. So it was, I had told the dads, prepare for a baby with, I never had big babies, but we were told to prepare for a big baby. And they both came out barely 6 pounds. So very tiny and sort of it's emotionally taxing, physically, the changes in your body, it's, everything.
Yeah. We've got time for one more question just come in. What kinds of support would you recommend a single surrogate consider arranging for herself?
A single surrogate?
Yeah, here in New Zealand.
Okay. So I mean, I suppose now that I'm single, if I was to do it again, the IPs, they would need to be local for me, or at least the lower half of the North Island.
And local, so they could do what though?
So that they could be there to sort of, I suppose I would need help. If I was to do it again, I would need help with my 3 kids. I mean, my youngest is 10 and my oldest is 14.
Yeah.
But I would need help with them, even just coming in and cooking a meal, or just coming in and hanging out and just keeping that bond and that friendship connection going, and sort of knowing that I'm not just being used for my body.
Sure.
Yeah,
And
I could have put that better, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I've seen that from before. Look, guys, that's great. It's so useful. Thank you so much for coming and sharing. It was great. We're just going to finish with the parent panel now, so stay on the line and listen to that if you can. And if other parents' questions come in, then maybe you could answer them on the Q&A tab if they come in there. All right, guys, look, we're going to now move to, as I said, the parents who are going to talk to us who've done surrogacy all over the place. So we've got Cameron Owens who's come in here. Sean's is here on the line now. James is with us, and Amira. So who am I missing? I'm missing Cameron. Okay. So I'll just introduce who a bit. So firstly, Amira has been on with us years ago. Amira's a mum via surrogacy in Canada, but her journey was not simple. She wrote a book about it, Mission to Motherhood, to really explain, how it went. We'll talk a bit about that today and how she became a parent through Canada. Cameron and his husband started their journey in November 2018, and their daughter Holly was born November 2020 in Boston. And you guys are about to do it all over again, aren't you?
Yeah, that's right. We've got the wheels in motion for number 2, which is pretty daunting, but
sure. James and his partner JP are also from Auckland, been together for 17 years. And then they decided after 17 years, we haven't got a child. Whoops, we forgot. But because James had been to university in the USA, they did decide in the US for their journey. They matched with a surrogate called Valerie. And we'll talk about what happened next in a minute. Sean did surrogacy locally in New Zealand. Sean Jonas, and he'll talk to us about his domestic journey with what we call gestational surrogacy, or surrogate plus an egg donor, which I think you all did in that way. So thank you guys for sharing. Look, we might start, James, with you. Thank you for getting up early, because I think you're overseas right now, aren't you?
Yeah, we ducked out when the Omni outbreak took place. So
yeah, good idea.
It's about 4 a.m. in Switzerland.
Oh, God, yeah. Man, tell us about how the US stuff works. What do you do first? Do you choose an egg donor first, or a surrogate, or an IVF clinic? What?
Well, actually, for me it was the agency. So what happened was I basically picked an agency, which was Donor Concierge, and Donor Concierge then matched me with both a surrogate and an egg donor. And the egg donor was anonymous, but to meet the Rights of the Child Act in New Zealand and comply with that, I requested that the egg donor leave her social security details, for the kids later when they're 18, if they want to access that. And that we contracted. So, I mean, I have to say, just listening to the sort of the last panel, it's a really different set of experiences, because of course, because you're paying, you're buying your eggs and you're paying your surrogates. And I'm still close with my surrogate. She's actually going to meet me in London and meet the kids. And she was meant to come over to New Zealand when the COVID lockdown happened. I was bringing her over to see the kids. We stay in touch on WhatsApp. We call on birthdays, but she was, it was a financial contractual arrangement. So I guess it's a very different thing, I think, than doing things altruistically, completely altruistically. It still felt very altruistic and amazing to me, and but I can't imagine having done it without it being a clearly contracted financial arrangement.
Yeah. were you driving the process much more than your partner was at the start?
I drove the process completely. So my partner was not convinced that he wanted to be a father at all, and we declared that openly with Oranga Tamariki during the whole process and with Margaret. And you know, we just left that as an open question. So I did all of the adoption as a single parent, and my partners obviously went through the whole process and is in the oral judgment, but as far as the actual adoption in New Zealand occurred, I did it as a single parent. Right. And New Zealand was pretty unique in allowing that too. It should be said at the time. It wasn't possible in the UK at the time.
And what about now? You've got 2 kids. I mean, is JP being a dad?
Oh yeah, totally. No, he's papa and he's dad and all the rest of it. But I mean, we didn't get around to redoing the adoption because he's de facto parent anyway, and he has all the rights and everything, and we just haven't done it. And also, we're quite an international couple, so we really liked the adoption format, or you know, I found it incredibly positive because it allowed for instance, the kids to be. I think Margaret Casey mentioned this, that in New Zealand, the kids, if they're born overseas but adopted, they are otherwise than by descent, meaning they're considered to have been born in New Zealand. And because I'm a UK resident and you know, have UK rights, basically they're also British citizens born in Britain, and they're also Swiss, and they're also US citizens. So I feel like the adoption is an incredible gift, really, if you know, for us anyway.
But you're also a New Zealand resident, are you?
I'm a New Zealand permanent resident, but my kids can be Kiwis on adoption.
Okay, got it. Wow. Yeah, they're international from the start. My God. Was it hard to decide on an egg donor? I mean, I know there's quite a few choices in the USA about egg donors. Was that a difficult? Yeah,
I mean, it's a weird one because you find that from a medical perspective, everybody tells you to go find a 16-year-old. You know, it's slightly gross, to be honest. And you all these pictures of like Latino girls, their boobies out, kind of. It was very strange and very weird to me what I was getting through from the egg donor side. And in the end, I went for a much more mature, you know, option. Someone who had done it previously, who seemed very articulate. You know, had a lot of experience, and I felt like if my kids did turn up at 18, it was somebody who had made an informed decision about what they were doing. I literally had one egg donor pull out because, you know, a pet had passed away, you know, which I guess is traumatic, but it's something that like an 18-year-old who's selling their eggs to go to South Africa to look at lions or something, you know, it was a lot of this very weird. It just felt that part of it felt very dodgy to me, quite frankly, like the reasons people were selling their genetic material. Yeah. So I think that was the hardest part of the process.
Yes, as donors, you're not meeting them at all, are you? You're talking to the donor.
No, it's all done through agents. So for me anyway, it was an agent process. So you literally get sent pictures of, you know, very young, well, only not because I'm requesting that, but that's just what medically you're being told to look for, is this kind of as youthful as possible kind of eggs, which is not what I ended up doing at all.
Yeah, interesting. Sean, let's go to you. You're a gay dad in Auckland, I think, aren't you?
Yes, that's right.
When did you guys start thinking about having kids? How long before you started?
I can't quite remember, but I think we've discussed it a few years before we eventually got round to you know, putting it out there on social media. Yeah.
Right. Was one of you pushing harder than the other?
I think my partner was at the time. I don't know if I was 100% ready for a child or thinking of children as much back then, but by the time we started the process, we were both kind of fully into it.
How old were you when you started the process?
It was in 2018. Was it, Samantha? I think November-ish. I think something around that kind of time. Yeah. Okay. And then our son was born in July 2020.
Well, how old were you in 2018?
I'm 34 now, so
Okay, so we're talking early, maybe 30-ish.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. What did you do about, how did you find a surrogate and a donor?
My partner's sister was a member of like a parenting forum or Facebook group in New Zealand. And the group was just everything about parenting. So she kind of just put a post up on our behalf, kind of saying, look, we're interested in egg donors and maybe a surrogate, kind of going down this road. And yeah, we got quite a lot of hits, mainly for people that were interested in donating the eggs. And then we got a few hits as well for people who are interested in being surrogates.
And how come she put the post up? How come she put the post up rather than you guys? Was it?
I don't know. I think we were just maybe a bit shy at the time to do it, and she was kind of encouraging us to do it and said, "Hey, should I do it for you?" And we're like, "Okay, we won't argue with that."
Yeah, wow. So once you had some replies, I mean, how do you sort out who's serious and who's not?
We had tons of replies from lovely ladies that were willing to donate the eggs or interested in the process.
Yeah.
I think we had over 20 at the time. And so we kind of started talking to a few of them over Messenger, and then we kind of thought, well, maybe we should kind of have some set questions that we'll ask. So we kind of asked about if they had any kind of major medical issues, where they lived, and we obviously had a bit of a stalk of their Facebook profile, and we had a few other questions which I can't quite remember. And then I think we actually spoke to them on the phone, and we ended up going with a lady, Quinn, actually, who also lives in Auckland, and she was 27 or 26 at the time, and she's got 2 young ones of her own, and she was happy to kind of explore that process with us, and she hadn't done that before. So
yeah, wow. And how did you find dealing with an IVF clinic in Auckland? Was that okay?
Yeah, it was okay. I don't think the clinic was 100% geared up to be dealing with same-sex couples, and we'd get sent forms that would describe one of us as being a wife, which I had to ask them to change. But in the main, I mean, we got what we needed done through the clinic, but I did feel like we had to constantly follow up and inquire about where we're at and what's going on. But we are still dealing with them at the moment. But our counsellor, the counsellor or health psychologist that we deal with, has probably been our biggest support and was really good.
Yeah, okay. Amira, talk about your journey for a second. What led you to surrogacy? Remember, you had a long infertility history, didn't you?
Yeah. So I struggled since puberty with really heavy periods, which was eventually diagnosed as severe fibroids. And then on top of that, I was then diagnosed with endometriosis in my early 30s. So yeah, I was basically told you'll be really lucky if you can carry a pregnancy. But yeah, I did do quite a few rounds of IVF and did get pregnant, but lost the baby. And it was quite a bad loss. I was in the hospital for, I don't know, almost a week and a lot of blood loss. And they just said, you can't try this again. You know, you got to find an alternative. So that's when I hadn't even considered surrogacy, because living in New Zealand, I don't have any family, and knowing, you know, that you had to find somebody close to you to do it. I just didn't have anyone like that.
Yeah.
So,
But are you originally from Canada?
Yeah, so I'm Canadian, but I've been here 15 and a half years now.
Right. So did you try and go on the forums for New Zealand and find a surrogate locally?
Yeah, well, even before that happened, after I lost my pregnancy, it was a pretty crazy situation, but I had an acquaintance who actually knocked on my door and offered to be a surrogate for me, which sounds completely nuts, and it sort of was. it ended up being, yeah, it didn't work out. We did go down that route, and we got to the point of we had one transfer. So we produced 7 embryos, and we had one embryo transfer with her. So we did everything, went through all the hoops here. And that one failed. And then she decided that she quite rightly was not in the right mental state to continue. It just wasn't the right fit for all of us. So then we looked to Canada after that. It was just too much of another mountain to climb to try and do the whole thing again here in New Zealand and all the ethics committee. And because I mean, it took the best part of a year to get to that stage. So
yeah. Just before we talk about Canada, Sean, did you have any false starts with surrogates in New Zealand, which you started talking and then it didn't work?
We had 2 surrogates we were talking to. One of them kind of eventually ghosted us, and the other one was Samantha, who ended up being our surrogate.
Right.
So it was just one other person. It was more so a lot of people that were interested in egg donation.
Yeah, okay. Amira, coming back to Canada, did you end up using an agency in Canada, or was it word of mouth you found a surrogate there?
Yeah, so again, we got super lucky. One of my best friends in Canada is an obstetrician, and she worked with a nurse who had been a surrogate a few times in Canada. And the nurse was carrying her own twins at the time, so she couldn't be our surrogate, but her best friend had delivered twins 8 months prior. And so said, like her best friend, Natalia, had watched her go through the whole surrogacy thing and wanted to be a surrogate herself because she had a great pregnancy, and she struggled to get pregnant as well. In terms of they had to have IVF, which was actually a blessing because she already knew the whole process of going through IVF. She had the clinic, she had the doctor. So Yulia, the nurse, put us in touch with Natalia, her best friend. And within 4 months, we were pregnant in Canada. And that included shipping our embryos, going through all the legal process. So
you had your own embryos with your eggs you're shipping over?
Yeah.
Or?
So I was fine. I could produce eggs. I just couldn't carry the pregnancy. So we shipped our remaining 6 embryos to Canada, which was a nightmare. They got lost in transit. So the tank got lost. No joke. 10 days, we didn't know where it was in the world. And they found them in Osaka, Japan. At a fertility clinic. Yeah, you guys will understand how much of a nightmare that was. So yeah, that's a very long story short. It was probably the worst 10 days of my life, but they did find them. They were still alive. Thankfully, we didn't know until they were then transferred into another tank, shipped to Canada, arrived in Ottawa, and then we didn't know if they'd survived really until our first embryo transfer was successful.
The first one worked.
Yeah, the first one worked. Yeah. So the first one ended up being our son, Cairo, who's now 7.5.
Wow.
Yeah.
Jan, your first transfer didn't work, did it? Oh, he's on mute. You got to unmute yourself.
Yeah, no, it didn't, but it was no way near as stressful. I mean, it was one of those moments, but it was 5 weeks in. Yeah. And we got a call, and Valerie had to go in and have a procedure. So for her, it was hard. I mean, I guess when I was listening to the surrogacy panel, I was trying to think kind of what was expected of me for support. And obviously, at the time that happened, we were in Madrid, and she was in the US. We were on vacation in Europe, and I did fly over for the scans, so but not all of them, the later ones.
But you had
I made sure I was in one.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I was just thinking, like, how did that work for us? And I think that we had a really funny meeting, before we decided to go forward as, for her to act as our surrogate. We kind of flew to San Fran, me, JP, and Eric, her partner, and Valerie, and we we decided to go to Alcatraz, and we like walked around this prison complex talking about becoming parents. And she made it absolutely clear that she already had a kid. She didn't want to be a mother in any sense. Like, she wasn't going to be a tummy mummy or a surrogate mother. This was a contractual agreement that was around trust, and it was contractual, And so I think the terms were really set in that from the beginning. But I felt obviously very bad that she had to go through a procedure to remove, the unborn. Basically, there was no heartbeat after 5 weeks. Yeah. But then we just went again, and that was our firstborn son. So,
Amira, given you found a surrogate privately, does it mean you didn't have any agency support for the pregnancy?
No, there was no support. The fertility clinic in Canada, though, they are so much more geared up for surrogate pregnancies. Like, it wasn't a thing. It wasn't an issue for them. They had done 1,000 before us, so we felt like it was just a regular pregnancy. And our lawyer was good as well in Canada. So I didn't feel like we needed any more support than we had. Yeah.
I suppose I'm needing more support for your surrogate who's carrying the baby.
Oh, right. Yeah. Well, she was tough as nails. Like, she's a Ukrainian Russian, and I don't know how they breed them over there, but she just didn't flinch. She was so awesome. And I guess one major thing was her husband was supportive. And I think that is super important. Like, you need to have a supportive partner for your surrogate. Well, our second surrogate was a single mom, but she was from a large Italian family with 5 sisters. So she had them, but for both of them, they had really good support, family support. So that was awesome because, yeah, obviously, I didn't meet either of our surrogates until a week before the babies were born, except through video conferencing, like this.
There were 2 different surrogates in Canada, were there?
Yeah, so we had 2 different for our 2 sons. Yeah.
Okay, got it. Cameron, thanks for waiting on the line. Look, you and your partner are in Auckland. You're a gay couple. What made you decide you wanted to have kids?
Oh, it's just something that had been in the back of my mind most of my life, really. I knew that I wanted to be a dad. Met Stuart, and it wasn't really something that he'd thought too much about. But as the relationship went on, we started talking about it a bit more, and we were living in London at the time. It's probably 8 or 9 years ago. Went to a seminar about it all. And then, went from there and didn't sort of start seriously looking into it until we moved back to New Zealand a few years after that, maybe 2017, 2018.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was just something that innately I always knew that I wanted, and Stu got on board eventually.
Right. So you were driving it from the start.
Yeah, more so than he was.
Yeah. Okay. What made you choose the USA as a destination?
I think for us, it was the sort of certainty of process and legalities. We're a little bit older. I was sort of late 38 at the time. Stu was early